being recorded.
Thank you. And there's no special announcement this morning. Is that correct, Mr. Braven?
There is with respect to call-in.
Okay.
So in accordance with AB 361, we will be conducting public comment telephonically. Members of the public wishing to offer public comment may do so by calling 310-306-3065. Again, I'm sorry, that's 213-306-3065, 213-306-3065. When prompted, please enter code 249-534-468-52. Again, the prompt code is 249-534.
He's so cool.
468-52#. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per item and a total of 5 minutes on all items. When calling in, please identify whether you are speaking on a specific item or on general public comment. Also, if you are following the meeting on your computer, please turn down the volume so that we don't get any feedback. At this point, I will turn it over to the board secretary for announcements and roll call.
Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Water and Power Commissioners. Today is Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. This proceeding is broadcast on Channel 35. The exact broadcast times can be found by contacting Channel 35.
And would you take the roll?
President McCLAIN-HILL,
Present.
Vice President Reyes,
Present.
Commissioner Barad-HOPKINS,
Present.
3 members present and a quorum. I will now turn it over to President McCLAIN-HILL.
Thank you. I do have just a couple of opening statements this morning. I first want to talk a little bit about extreme heat and about the urban tree canopy. This past week, I had the pleasure of attending 2 events in various parts of the city of Los Angeles. One out in the valley, an event sponsored by Pacoima Beautiful, where, among other things, the significant topic of concern was extreme heat and the fact that climate change, while we often continue to refer to as something that is on its way or something that is part of a distant future, it reminded me of its presence right here, right now in parts of our city, where people are struggling to come to grips with things like the extreme heat. Later, over the weekend, I had the privilege of attending the city's Arbor Day event in South LA in Commissioner Hawkins Dawson's district. And again, to hear constituents talk about the significance and importance of creating urban tree canopies for shade and as a direct response to climate change, and with the added benefit of additional neighborhood beautification. This department has invested a significant amount of resources into supporting the continued expansion of our and planting of trees throughout the city. But I am very interested in and will be very interested in the upcoming weeks and months in our specific plan to address issues related to temperature, particularly in those areas of our city where we have got vulnerable populations who have difficulty coping with high heats, who for any number of reasons, including affordability, are reluctant to use their air conditioning in the summer. We are losing more people, an increasing number of deaths associated with extreme heat. We talk about the impacts of climate change as it relates to water and as it relates to overall stress on our grid, but I'd like to see us begin to focus in very concrete ways to how we meet community concerns of our neighbors, many of whom live in the San Fernando Valley, but who are spread all across the city, who are going to have to be able to survive ever-increasing temperatures. Planting trees is a significant and important and targeted way of approaching these issues, but I'm also interested in other impacts on our system and our ability to deliver services. And so just wanted to say a little bit about that. In addition, I also want to say a little bit about as we continue to work on, think about, implement, and drive forward our own green agenda in response to climate change. We talk a lot about equity. We talk a lot about values. We talk a lot about jobs. Where the rubber meets the road is when those values are challenged. And there will be challenges, there will be pushback, and there are costs associated with all of those things. I want to affirm in a very significant way this department's commitment to this city's commitment to its values, and to indicate that we will be, let me speak for me, that I will be very, very, very opposed to compromising equity, compromising commitment to not just jobs, but to union jobs, compromising our commitment to building the most resilient and environmentally forward system that this nation has ever seen, but doing it means doing it right. And increasingly, there will be stress on our values. And those stresses may come, in the form of, gee, we could do it faster and cheaper if we abandoned our commitment to livable wages and to the union promise of a of the kinds of middle-class lifestyle that those jobs portend. It could be simpler and faster if we overlook or skim over our commitment to equity, to planning and investing in a way that everyone has access. None of these values are in conflict. In fact, they are all harmonious. And I look forward to our demonstration of how these practices align, and our steadfastness in standing up to those who would suggest that we do otherwise. So those are my opening comments for today. Is there anyone that has anything that they'd like to say before we move on? Okay, thank you. If we could go to first agenda item.
There are no callers for public comment. All public comment is now closed.
Terrific. Then we will move to, I don't have my.
Should be me.
Yes, I was going to say, I think the next would be our management, our report from our general manager.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep my report as brief as possible. We do have a short video that Brian Wilbur will show at the end regarding our Lyman Rodeo coming up. Briefly, we'll hear a report today about the snowpack and what the water future looks like for the state. But just to recap, we are worse off this time this year than we were last year. And there's a lot of things going on right now behind the scenes. in Metropolitan Water District and with the state in terms of water allotment on the state water project. So, and some of those folks will be describing that in detail during the report, but it is becoming a very serious issue that we'll have to pay very close attention to in the next several weeks. Last week, we did honor our commercial customers with our 7th annual Sustainability Awards. And this was to honor folks who had made efforts to save water and power at their place of business. We had 4 categories: energy efficiency, water conservation, electrification of transportation, and demand response. And together, their actions drove about 5 million gallons of water per year of savings, or the equivalent of about 70 homes. They reduced enough CO2 emissions to take about 2,000 cars off the road. And so it's something that we've worked closely with our customers for several years now. It was a great chance for me together and have a guest speaker and to honor those companies that did that. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do it in person like we used to be able to do it. So. Coming up on April 23rd, we have our Earth Day at Chatsworth Park, also known as Chatsworth. I say Chatsworth Park, that's a different place. I apologize. Chatsworth Reservoir, known as Chatsworth Nature Preserve. And so that's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. At the Chatsworth Commission President. Remember, we were at Chatsworth with the Native American tribes celebrating the winter solstice that we were out there. And so this is a big event. We expect probably about 2,000 people to attend. Chatsworth is so large that you wouldn't even hardly notice there's 2,000 people there. It's a great property, great opportunity. We partner with a lot of nonprofit groups, nature groups, herpetology groups, other conservation organizations. So I'd like to encourage you all to go if you're in town and have the ability to go there, and as well as all of our employees and the customers as well. It's open to the public. It's free of charge. We also that day are celebrating an Earth Day in the Owens Valley with the 8th annual Owens River cleanup. And so we do a cleanup along with the folks in the Owens Valley to clean up the Owens River. We're also co-sponsoring an Owens Lake Bird Festival. This is done with the Friends of the Inyo, the County of Inyo, and Metabolic Studio. The Bird Festival is a annual event on Owens Lake because it's such an important migratory place for waterfowl. And so that'll be going on that time as well. President McCLAIN-HILL, you mentioned the Arbor Day celebration. Interestingly, we put about $2.4 million a year to plant about 40,000 trees. But to me, it's not enough. I totally agree. I've always thought this is an area that we should be doing more. I don't know the logistics of doing more because they certainly have to be established. But to me, getting more shade and shade trees, not only for the shade factor, but I think it's also a huge neighborhood improvement and brings equity to a lot of neighborhoods. So I'm fully behind any ideas you'd like to pursue in that to increase that program. Lastly, today, for all our employees and their families as well, we have another COVID vaccination event. It's done in conjunction with IBW and St. John's Hospital. So that is going on from 8 to 3 o'clock today. And we're usually they're serving every brand of vaccine and boosters. So we encourage any employees who would like to take advantage of that to certainly do so. And your families are welcome as well. And lastly, I'd like to have Brian Wilbur give us a quick video about the Lyman's Rodeo coming up, and you want to tell us about the dates for that again, Brian?
Yeah. So real quickly, a few weeks ago we sent our teams, a journeyman team and 4 apprentices to the rodeo in Austin for the American Public Power Association, and it's just one of the 3 events that we do every year: the International Rodeo, the APPA Rodeo, and then our rodeo, which is coming up on May 14th. So in less than a month away. We'll go ahead and put this event. If I could play the video real quick of our guys in Austin. So if you haven't been to one of the rodeos before, please come out on May 14th. It's going to be a great show here at our Truesdale training facility. This was our Austin group that went out for the last rodeo here. But it's a good time. It's very family friendly. We have a ton of stuff for the kids. It's a great event. It's a lot of fun. And it gives the guys a really chance to showcase their work. One of the things when we go out to this one specifically when it's all public power utilities, to really showcase what our guys can do and how well they are compared to a lot of the other utilities, right? We really have a top-notch training program here. They do a fantastic job. And it's one of the reasons that they're recruited out so much from the Water and Power group here for how well they do. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I have a question. Is there an opportunity to recruit or, do we distribute flyers about DWP, our training classes?
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes. So one of the major reasons why we do these events is to recruit. The downside is they also try to recruit from us. But we have a strong presence there where we talk to everybody on recruiting people from the outside to come to the department, especially at the APPA rodeo when you have a lot of public utilities. The benefits here at the department really shine and it keeps them in a public utility. And so we do recruit very heavily while we're there.
Okay.
And
Good to know.
we're also working to make sure we get as many high school kids and other people who might be interested in these jobs to be aware of the rodeo. Hopefully they'll come in as well. So.
Good. And women.
And women, absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. And I need to briefly turn the meeting back over to our city attorney with respect to public comment. And before he makes his additional announcement, I simply want to say that I look forward to the day when public comment can be done in person. And we are relieved of all of the technical glitches that make it more difficult for people to address this body. So with that, Mr. Brejovich.
Yes, continuing on the issue of technical glitches, I was advised that there was one. And so we will need to reopen public comment, and the call-in number is still the same, 213-306-3065. Again, 213-306-3065, but there is a different access code. That access code is 2486-836-9030. Again, that's 248-6836-9030. And what I would suggest, Madam President, is perhaps give people the opportunity to get on that line, that we wait a few minutes before taking public comment, and then pick up public comment at the time you deem appropriate.
Okay, thank you so much. Then with that, we will move to introduction of motions for future consideration. I'm not aware of any motions at this time. Comments from our ratepayer advocate?
We'll have comments on a number of the management report discussion items, but no comments on any of the agenda items agendized for vote unless questions arise.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I appreciate that. Do we have any neighborhood impact reports? Secretary.
There are no community impact statements or formal positions that were filed by any neighborhood councils on the items on today's agenda.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Then we are at item H, consideration of items recommended for approval. It's my understanding that the department would like to defer. Is it item 6? So we will defer item 6 for a future agenda. With that said, yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we act on the actual items on the agenda, we will need to take public comment. So why don't we move now? Is there anyone in the public comment line? While you are working on that, why don't we take a presentation which will allow folks to configure themselves and make sure that we have ample time for people to do public comment. And I'd like to start with that presentation number 2, actually, regarding drought updates, if that's okay. Mr. Collins, are we ready?
Good morning, Commissioners. As I have been reporting at most of the board meetings, we are facing the 3rd year of a drought, and we believe the situation is getting pretty dire. So today I have the Director of Water Resources, David Pettyjohn, as well as Sabrina Sue, Manager in the Water Resources Division. They're going to provide you with an update, a presentation on what's going on with the water supply for this particular year.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who can remain social distance while presenting, you are certainly welcome to remove your mask while presenting. And what we often do is we'll have one at the back mic and one in the front. Yeah, that way, if it's more comfortable to do it without your mask, please.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much for being here.
Well, thank you, Commissioner McCLAIN-HILL and Commissioners. We have a very quick presentation here for you on the drought update. It's about 15 slides. So why don't we get started? First slide. So this on the left here, you see what it was like at the end of last year. The darker the red, the worse the drought. So pretty bad conditions in September of 21. After a couple of good storms, we got to February of this year and things had improved. But then we had the three driest months in the history of the state of California, and that brought us to March. And so that's the far right-hand side, and it's going to be, by the time we get to September, I imagine it'll be at least as dark as it was September of last year. So things are not good. Next slide. So the supply conditions, the state snowpack peaked early this year, and this may be an indication of things to come, some climate change issues potentially. On the left here, the State Water Project, the peak snowpack occurred actually in January. Usually doesn't occur until April, but it occurred in January. We got our peak snowpack on the state side at 17.2 inches of water content. That was 61% of the April 1st normal, but by the time April 1st came around, that 61% was down to 26%. So huge runoff, huge melt off, but not a lot of associated runoff. LA Aqueduct, we experienced the same thing. We had a very early peak snowpack happen in January, but by the time we got to April 1st, that 66% we had in January had dwindled all the way down to where it is today at 22%. So not good on the LA Aqueduct either. Colorado River fared a little better. Their peak snowpack did occur close to April 1st in March 18th at 91% of normal. And then by April 1st, it had gone down just a little bit to 88%. Next slide. So what does all this mean for LA? We are dependent upon imported water supplies, both from the Colorado River and the State Water Project, especially during dry periods. And what I have boxed here in red is the last drought that we just came out of a few years ago. And you can see that mustard color in the middle. That's how much water we buy from the Metropolitan Water District. And it goes up dramatically during dry periods. So during the last drought, we were buying 60 to 70% of our water from Metropolitan. And you can see it's starting to occur. It occurred last year. It will occur again this year. So we're entering into another one of these periods. And the reason that's so important is because of that water that we buy from Metropolitan, the lion's share of it is State Water Project water. And the state system is really having a hard time. And this is the 3rd consecutive dry year on the state system. The upper left-hand side, you can see the effects of climate change here. From 1982 through 2000, pretty low variability in the kind of weather patterns we saw. 2001 through 2011, increased variability. And now, currently, we're seeing some really wild volatility in what we're seeing as far as rainfall. And right now we're at 2022 where that question mark is, and we're at a 5% State Water Project allocation. That's only the 3rd time that that's happened in the history of the State Water Project, and it's all happened since 2015. We've had 3 of those. In the old days, they said the State Water Project would never produce less than 10%. And here, in just since 2015, we have 3 years where it's down to 5%. The two pictures on the right, the top one is San Luis Reservoir, the bottom one's Oroville. The 2 large reservoirs in the state, they're both 40% full. And the little histogram down in the bottom left is Metropolitan's access to their state water project storage, which is going down dramatically because when you don't have a lot of water flowing through the state water project, California Aqueduct, it's hard to do exchanges of their water they have in storage. So it limits the amount of water they can bring south. Colorado River isn't that much better. Next slide. So the first ever shortage in the history of the Colorado River system was declared for 2022. And that's because Lake Mead dropped below 1075. It's currently down at 1061. And also Lake Powell is at critically low levels. It's down at such a low level that it's starting to hover around the minimum power pool. So this year, the Bureau of Reclamation is going to cut releases from Lake Powell into Lake Mead. What that means is the probability of shortage is going to go up. This year, of course, it's in shortage, but Metropolitan is not sharing in that shortage. But there's a 60% probability that starting in 2024, Metropolitan will start sharing in shortage. And that 60% probability of shortage sharing by Metropolitan is going to last all the way till 2026. And they may have to share up to 300,000 acre feet of water. Next slide. So where we are today, this is just a little timeline of what's happened just since last year. As I said, 2020, 2021 were both dry. We're in the third consecutive dry year. The governor issued a notice in 2021 of a statewide drought emergency calling for a voluntary 15% conservation. December 1st, 2021, the Department of Water Resources issued its initial allocation of state water project water of 0. So that was a call to action. January 1st, that was the first ever Lower Colorado River Basin declaration of shortage by the Bureau, which I mentioned. January 4th, the State Water Resources Control Board adopted emergency regulations preventing wasteful uses of water. Thankfully, our ordinance already has all those in place and we enforce those, so we were in compliance. January 20th, the DWR announced a pretty healthy allocation compared to what we have now. They said it would be 15%. And they said that there was only a 1% chance that it would go down, not up. Well, 2 months later, it did go down, not up. So we hit that 1%, and it's down at 5%. And what that means is there's only going to be 100,000 acre feet of water coming into Southern California down the California Aqueduct this year. And in light of that, the governor 10 days later called for urban water suppliers to implement level 2 of their water conservation plans. Next slide. And this is our plan. And we are actually currently in level 2. So we were in compliance with what the governor called for. And I'll talk a little more about this plan here a little bit later. Met did respond to this, that the 5% state water project allocation is 100,000 acre feet to Met, but it's insufficient to meet the demands of the member agencies that are dependent upon the state water project. We're one of those agencies, but there are others that are in the same situation we're in. There's the Cayugas Municipal Water District, the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, the Three Valleys Municipal Water District, and the Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District. So all these 5 agencies are the big users of state water project water in Met service territory. There isn't enough water to go around. And so this 5% isn't going to last very long. And what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up under a health and safety supply allocation from the state to Southern California. And what they're going to allocate is 55 gallons per person per day.
You sound very calm, and so I'm getting lost.
Okay.
And the only reason I say that is if I'm at home and I'm listening to you, what does this mean to me? What, as a resident of Los Angeles, what am I dealing with? Because, you know, the number of acre feet tends to lose me a little bit if I'm a resident of Los Angeles. If I've got to translate this from the perspective of not just what's occurring in the world, but to the point of what does this mean for the people who are relying on us for water and power? What do they need to prepare for? You know, you've indicated just in this presentation thus far that the worst case scenario was not anticipated. In fact, at the time, just 2 months ago, that we received a 15% allocation, the idea that that would be cut was considered remote. Well, that's now occurred, which gives us a good sort of window into how volatile the situation is and how difficult it is to plan and to understand what's happening with climate. So
Very good question.
help me.
Next slide, Sabrina. So this is our water conservation plan ordinance, and this is really the way we respond citywide. So our customers, this is what they have to do when we move up in the phases of our ordinance. So currently we're in phase 2. What this really means is that for our customers, they have to comply with all of the restrictions you see here in phase 1. So plus they have to comply with what's in phase 2. So currently we're asking our customers to make sure that if you're watering your property, that no water is running off your property. If you have any leaks in your system, it's mandated that you fix those leaks. If you have an irrigation system, it must be turned off 48 hours during a rainfall, plus 48 hours after that rainfall, it has to be turned off. You cannot hose down your driveways or any other hard surfaces. We don't allow washing of your vehicles with open hose. You have to have an automatic shutoff to that hose valve. And then you cannot water outdoors in the city of Los Angeles between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's all in the restricted use ordinance. We are currently in phase 2. So above and beyond the things I just mentioned, our customers are limited to 3-day-a-week watering. And that's not like 3 days all day. It's 3 days a week, 8 minutes a station. So you can actually water your lawn in the city of Los Angeles no more than 24 minutes a week. So that's what we're asking our customers to do. And that's where we are currently. Now, in response to your question, President McCLAIN-HILL, we have other phases that we may have to go to. And phase 3 would be all the things that I previously mentioned, plus we would limit outdoor watering to 2 days a week. And then we would make some recommendations on the use of pool covers and commercial washing of your vehicles. And then if we go to phase 4, which is 1 day a week outdoor watering, which could happen, then all the phase 1 through 3 restrictions will be in place. Plus you'll only be able to water outdoors 1 day a week, 8 minutes a station. The pool covers will be required, and you will have to wash your car at a commercial car wash facility that has a recirculation system on it, and they all do in LA now. And you will not be able to fill any directed fountains or pools or lakes with anything other than recycled water. And then if we have to, and it gets really bad and we go to phase 5, then outdoor watering is completely prohibited in the city of Los Angeles. Now, this is all to get back to a question you raised earlier about trees. You know, what's going to happen to trees and other things. We do allow hand watering of trees during all of these phases. So we're not requiring people to allow trees or other vegetation that you can keep alive with hand watering allowed. That's all allowed, but what we don't allow is the automatic sprinkler systems to go on and to stay on longer than what are in each of these phases. So we're currently at phase 2, but we could go to phase 3, 4, or 5.
I know that we have been very proud of the conservation efforts of the residents of the city of Los Angeles. Under phase 2 or phase 3, what would we expect in terms of a reduction in the utilization of water? I mean, we're not out there policing, you know, these restrictions and don't have the capacity to do that. So I assume that we're looking at an aggregate drop in the, you know, consumption of water, and we've been tracking that over time. Are we looking for additional reductions in that consumption, and what are we trying to achieve with respect to these kinds of measures?
Yeah, good question. Sabrina, can you back up a couple of slides to the water shortage communities? Oh, here we go. So you'll see the shortage gap that we target with each of these phases. Currently, we're in phase 2. Rough justice, we use about 500,000 acre-feet of water a year in the city of Los Angeles. If we were to go up a couple of phases, say to phase 4, and we were at 1 day, hopefully we could cut another 10 to 20% out of that. So 10%, you'd end up saving 50,000 acre feet, 20%, maybe 100,000 acre feet. But to get to another point you made, we actually do have a pretty robust enforcement mechanism, and I'll get into that here in a couple of slides. But this is kind of gives you the scale of what we're trying to do. For each phase, we hope to save as much as 10% additional reduction in outdoor water use, in water use overall from each phase. So that's what we target with these phases.
And how are we communicating with our residents so that they are not surprised by, they're not just caught unaware? And I assume, although again, and I should probably know, but I don't. So, which means that there are a lot of people out there that don't know. I assume that as, do these phases also have implications for water rates? So is there, as a part of our enforcement mechanism, is there any increase associated with your utilization of water that is relative to or sensitive to the phases that we're in?
There is, but it's actually to your benefit to comply, because the way the water rates work, as you use less water, you'll go down in the
Here.
We have 4 tiers. You go down in your tier. That's one financial implication. So, and I have a slide that'll show you that.
I guess, but my question is, does the tier limit change or not relative to the phase that we're in?
No.
Okay.
But what does change is the penalties that you'll face with each tier. So if you are not in compliance, the severity of the fine increases as the severity of the tier increases. So currently you're on a first offense based on where we're at now. It's at $200 for a first offense, and then it doubles and triples. And then as the phases go up, we add $100 to that. And so that's one way we get people's attention. We don't try to do that. We try to educate people as a first order of business. At 90+% of the time, people are just unaware and they comply when our water conservation response crews go out and talk to them. If they don't comply, then they get fined. We also have a whole ordinance that deals with wasteful uses of water, and that's for the very highest tier water use customers that we have. Some of those customers get into tier 4 and they use a tremendous amount of water, and we essentially target the highest water users in the city. We put them on a budget. If they live within the budget, they don't get fined. If they continue to waste water, then they get fined pretty severely. And for instance, if you were into phase 5 and you were a highest tier water customer who was not complying with your budget, you could be fined up to $40,000 per month under that ordinance. So we have pretty restrictive water waste ordinances in the city now. So those are kind of the financial implications. I hope that kind of gets to some of your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've been dominating
that's
this.
fine. That's fine.
Commissioner Reyes, did you have a question?
Yeah, just basically, we did have a very good campaign years ago on Just Save the Drop, where you have, practical tips for our customers, like how, showering, brushing your teeth. So are those being communicated right now, again, in terms of outreach to our customers, just really giving them solid tips as to how they can conserve, because they need to put that again as part of their habits.
Do have a customer communications plan. There's a slide on this a little later, but we have been working pretty closely with Joe Romalo's group, the corporate strategy and communications group. And he's got a lot of really good informational items that we've been working on and getting out to raise awareness of the unprecedented drought conditions and the things that each customer can do and promote ways to save water. We have it in multilingual messaging strategies, and so Joe Romalo has been working with us closely on that. I think Joe is online.
He's here.
Good back.
He can probably answer more of these questions if you have them. But
do we have a timeline for that when it will be when it will hit and be strengthened?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, commissioners. We actually completed a campaign, some of which is still running in the fall. When we were looking at actually a very wet December, there had been many agencies who weren't doing any communications at that time. We actually, with the support of water conservation and frankly their funds, spent $750,000 on getting out the word about our current phase, which is 3-day-a-week watering. as well as the restrictions, pushing paid social media, not just organic social media where you post, messaging direct to customers, not only about actions they can take, behavior changes now to comply with the restrictions that are in effect, but also the rebate programs that we have in place. So right now what we're doing is we're coordinating closely with MWD. I just met with their entire team last Friday to sequence their communication spend with ours as we find out more about what may come in terms of additional restrictions. So we're trying to time that up very closely with them. Some of our ads are still running, just so you know. We still have billboards up with 3-day-a-week watering because billboard companies leave them up. We'll be changing those out as we get closer into late May and into June. Our objective would be to hit this very heavy beginning in June, in addition to the regular communications that we do to encourage conservation. And it'll be two-pronged. On the one hand, we want to promote the heck out of our rebate programs because that's permanent savings. And on the behavior changes, we want to communicate about the drought emergency and the new rules, which we expect will potentially be in effect very soon with respect to days of the week watering, the other steps that Dave mentioned that are in the additional phases. I can answer additional questions if you'd like about the details of that program, but we are sequencing it up. MWD is about to make a very significant buy, and we want to back that up. We've also encouraged them to go ahead and share their messaging throughout the market, including in the city of LA, so we can maximize our spend because we're buying their water, so they're actually using our revenue to help make those advertising purchases as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
Sure.
Joe? Where were we? Should be on the slides. Back up.
A question while you're getting back to where you're restarting. Is there any special treatment of water use via drip irrigation or net FM?
Say that one more time.
Is there any special treatment of water use via drip irrigation or net FM, or is it treated like any other system?
Yeah, it's like any other system. So it's the same. So if it's above ground or underground, it's the same. All right. This is I think an important slide. It gives you a feel for a question you raised about enforcement. And this gives you an idea of where we've seen the most waste use complaints coming from in the city. So the red is the highest level of waste use complaints. The yellow is a little softer. And where you don't see yellow, that's where people are pretty much complying. Now, also on here, what I had staff do is put on all the underserved community areas in the city. And those are in the little small square boxes. And you'll notice that some of the best areas of water use efficiency and compliance are in the underserved communities. And so we have really tried to focus on some of the more affluent areas that are highest water use with our enforcement and our patrolling, because we found that the areas that are more underserved have a tendency to be more compliant as well. So the next slide. So these are some of the residential rebate programs that we offer. This is mirrored by our commercial rebate program. And we have a very robust offerings here. We've got pretty lucrative benefits that we offer people who want to do device-based conservation in their home. And this really helps, especially in some of the more underserved areas of the city, to comply, because we give quite a bit of money out, $250 to replace your toilet, $500 to replace your washing machine. These were recently increased. The toilets are up from $150 just a short while ago. We used to offer $400 on the washing machines. Now we offer $500. We give out free devices, aerator, faucet shutoff valves for your kitchen and aeration, and then shower heads. And so we have a lot of things that we offer. $3 a square foot for your turf removal. Well, turf removal is easy for some to do. It's difficult for others. And so we added a new program. Next slide. And this is some additional services we offer for those customers who may want to replace their turf, but have a hard time doing it because they have a barrier to overcome, which is they don't know how to redesign their landscape. And so we offer free turf replacement design services to those customers to help them overcome that barrier. And so through a combination of our education programs, our ordinances, our incentives, our free services, we've been able to see a decline in our water use. This gets back to something President McCLAIN-HILL mentioned, over the last 15 years of 30%, just in the last 15 years. Now, if you go back further than that, if you go back to the early 80s, we use the same amount of water we used in the late 70s as we use today, and there are over 1 million more people living in LA. So we have had a real robust effort in water use efficiency and conservation.
Could you back that slide up again?
Yes.
Just back up to the previous slide. So if I'm looking at just the turf replacement,
Yes.
am I correct? Is that up to $15,000?
For $3 per square foot, up to 15,000 square feet, and you can get
5,000. Up to 5, so it's 5,000? Yeah, it's up to 5,000 square feet.
5,000 square feet, so you're correct, $15,000.
And the only reason that I'm pointing that out is that on your previous slide where you pointed out the high rate of compliance or, sort of the high rate of, I guess of compliance with the ordinance in communities that are underserved. I mean, what immediately popped into my head is because those communities have lots of asphalt. They don't have yards. There's not a lot of, they don't have pools. There's not a lot of high water use amenities. And I just want us to be very mindful of that because, again, it goes back to investments in creating shade and tree canopies and things of that nature. Because when you start to look at the investments that we make in order to assist communities that, have different impacts. So clearly, if you've got a major, redesign of your yard to do and having invested in a situation with a small yard, I know it can be expensive and you've got to hire someone to come out and do landscape design because God forbid, how do you get all the color? And I mean, it's not an easy process. And I'm not being critical of that investment because frankly, the results that are yielded by that investment are significant. We're in a desert. We have to have drought tolerant, plants. We can't be trying to keep grass green. But this is just one of those areas where, we're looking at $250 to replace a toilet or $500 to replace a, clothes washer as compared to $15,000 to replace a yard with, all of the concierge services that come along with that now being added on. And I just want to underscore that when we think about, the investments that we're making around the city, we've got to be clear about the need to tailor those investments to meet communities where they are. So I'd be interested in, and as Marty has suggested, I think that we really want to take a hard look at the kinds of investments we're making in other areas of the city in order to address, again, not necessarily, impacts related to drought, but also impacts related to temperature and other issues. So that was it just struck me, those two slides together, that those little boxes, I mean, I know those communities and there's a reason that they're compliant versus other areas where they've got a lot of investment to protect and a lot of habits to change and just more amenities that they've got to figure out how to service.
Can I chime in on that thought real quick?
Yes.
One of the other things interesting, so, we've talked about a lot in power because for power, we look at solar and equity for solar rooftops and that sort of thing. And, there's so many more customers in power than there are water because multifamily residential usually has individual power meters with single water meters. And so, but what we've learned through looking at the power situation is over 60% of people in LA, they rent. So they may be in a house, a lot of times a duplex or an apartment building, some kind of multifamily complex. So one of the issues always is how do you help folks that are in a residential setting, but it's not their residence per se. And in many cases, different than power, they don't pay the water bill. The landlord does. So it's always hard to try to figure how to change behavior. And we've looked at individual metering, sub-metering of apartments, very expensive to do, and technically difficult. One of the things that we have been working hard with our apartment owners is on things like the low flush toilets and doing the commercial rebate programs to help them change fixtures out so that they can get the water savings. In a weird situation, it doesn't help the person who lives there because the bill is paid in conglomerate with their bill, but it does help the overall water use. And one of the things, like in the camera program that the board recently approved, is to provide more technical assistance for those multifamily building owners to not only have power efficiency and insulation and better heating and air conditioning and cooling and that sort of thing, but also water efficiency as well, to help leverage that, because we know that a lot of folks in LA are in multifamily settings, and how to have a way for them to participate in water savings when they personally are not driven by the price of the bill. And so that's always been a challenge and something that we work very hard on our residential commercial programs to try to leverage that.
And I think our leak detection system or program helps.
Yes.
Especially in disadvantaged communities where the homes are older, pipes are older. I think we should emphasize that in our campaign and our educational awareness, so that then they could really try to figure out why they have a higher bill. It's because the pipes are leaking. So
or you could have
encourage that.
Yeah, that are internal leaks in as well. And so it's a constant challenge is how to. It's like the situation we see on power, but different because there's a detachment from the bill itself. But you want to help drive behavior and make sure the appliances are installed for people to be as efficient as possible. So.
Well, I think just sort of following up on Commissioner Reyes' point, and again, also in recognition of how well LA residents have adapted, that it's very important to me that we really think about how we work with customers in a collaborative way. The communications piece becomes very critical, and it's not just about the money, it's about a scarce resource. And increasingly, people are coming to grips with the fragility of climate, with all of the various impacts, and are, I think, even more open to understanding that these are resources that are scarce and that need to be protected. And that we just go, above and beyond in terms of being creative about how we engage and entice people to work with us on solutions, which is, so I don't want to appear to be critical of any of the programs. I think that they're all important. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about how they're being deployed, that they're appropriate to each community setting, and that we're putting a lot of effort into partnering with Angelenos, because this could get dramatically worse. And we just have to be cognizant of that and help prepare. It's one of those hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, so that in any respect, we are resilient as we wait on Operation Next to come forward and give us greater flexibility. But
a couple of things that Anselmo reminded me of that I overlooked was we have a couple of new things we're looking into. One is a flume device. It's a device that we put on your water meter that you can see what in real time, how much water you're using on your smartphone. And we're piloting that. We also have home water use reports that we've got it out to about 60,000 of our customers. We're planning on taking it across our entire service territory. And these water reports will give a customer a view of how they're doing as far as their water use efficiency compared to their neighbors. So people in their neighborhood who are very efficient with the use of water, who have similar landscapes and yards that they have, they'll be able to see how am I doing in comparison. And then, we have other things that we're doing. You can see here, the primary effort of these water conservation crews, and these are the gentlemen who are out on the streets and ladies who are out on the street enforcing our ordinance, they are primarily educational, and they go out and they talk to the customer first before the customer is subject to a fine, and they try to educate them about what the ordinance is, where they may be violating the ordinance, how they can be in compliance with the ordinance, giving them some tips on what they can do. And then we're essentially trying to ramp up this enforcement effort, and it's going to have to be ramped up as the crisis grows. You'll have to ramp up enforcement because you're going to need to have more and more people out following up on reports of water waste.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So again, just kind of planning for what may be, I'd like to know that we are well down the road on that, that we have, plans in place, that we are preparing to scale, and that we, because these aren't faraway issues, right? These are very near-term issues. And our goal would be to be prepared and ready to deploy, and also to make sure that there is no unnecessary shock to the system as our customers begin to come to grips with what all this means.
And to that, Marty recently moved the Water Conservation Response Unit team back into the water system and gave us direction to start ramping it up. And so that's
Back in the water system from where?
It had been in customer service for some time.
Okay.
It was a good move.
So I said thumbs up.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Marty, for that.
If I could comment, I think looking back from a few years, how many years
Ensemble,
ago
he's
was it?
usurping, isn't he?
I would say we have not had to issue many fines, but a few gets a lot of attention. I will tell you what got the most attention when we sent the letters to the highest 1% water users, and people were aghast. We had phone calls from almost everybody.
Well, I was going to suggest that as we, again, deploy strategies, that it certainly makes sense to look at the highest users and to make sure that they are engaged very early in a process so that they, rather than wait for them to get, to violate and then be shocked, that they understand, as I said, what all of this means, because not everyone is glued to the newspaper or reading this particular section of the news or paying attention to what the governor is saying, that they understand what this means for them and what our expectations will be, and getting them prepared so that they're ready to meet these increasingly constrained tiers.
A big takeaway for us, just so you know, with this, in the last few years ago, we had the drought. A lot of folks, I mean, there's some really large properties in LA. It's hard for me personally to envision that, but there are multi-acre properties. But a lot of those folks don't live here, and they have people who manage the properties and accountants who pay their bills. And so the customer is actually very detached from the bill payment. And so we had someone dubbed the Wet Prince of Bel Air, and that we spent a lot of time with that. We actually, that person and their staff had no idea what was going on until we worked with them. They reduced their water use by half. And so, so it is that outreach with customers, particularly because there are some very large customers who are not necessarily LA residents all the time. And so that makes it, those people make a huge dent in the overall water use. And so that's an important target for us.
Okay.
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Last slide.
A lot of memories.
So just to give you a heads up on some things, today, the Metropolitan Water District has an informational item on this very same subject where they're going to be talking about their next steps and whether they're going to implement some sort of a shortage restrictions on the State Water Project exclusive areas. We anticipate that their board may take action on that on the April 26th to implement an emergency water conservation plan, which could include limiting water days. It may include a gallons per person per day restriction as well, so we don't know exactly what it is. We anticipate making a recommendation to the mayor, and with council concurrence, the mayor would determine what phase of our ordinance we would go to. That's a mayoral determination. If the mayor was to make a proclamation on a higher phase of our water conservation ordinance, we would enforce that and implement it. And we would report to you on a monthly basis, at least, minimum on a monthly basis, on the progress in compliance with that proclamation. And then also we would report monthly to the mayor's water cabinet on that.
So are you teasing me? It says LADWP recommendation to mayor and council for higher conservation ordinance phase as a next step. So are you going to tell me what that recommendation is, or are you just, giving me a little kernel, a little morsel of information and I can read it in the newspaper?
Well, in all honesty, it's Marty's decision.
We don't have an answer yet. That's the reality. We'll discuss it, and we want to discuss that openly, but there's part of this depends on what action Met takes and what the state does. And so we don't have enough information yet.
What are we considering?
Well, I think
we're a transparent body here.
So,
So if you have it on the slide,
I'll tell you
what's under consideration.
So I think it's pretty strong likelihood that we'll have to go to 2-day-a-week watering. That would be phase 3. That'd be the phase 3. And I will tell you, when we rewrote the ordinances, we tried to change the numbering because the phases would be nice if the numbers and the days matched. But so that'd be 2-day-a-week water under phase 3. There will be a push from Met, we believe, to go to 1-day-a-week watering. There are challenges in my mind that we're putting, tremendous value of landscape at risk in areas that don't have enough watering. And if LA is supposed to take that step, I would expect every agency that also shares in the same water supply to take the same step, because LA is far and away ahead of other agencies in terms of conservation. And I think that needs to be recognized, that we have stepped up, our residents have stepped up and saved a tremendous amount of water, probably started water conservation before basically anybody else in California and maybe in the United States. And so I would look to see some real fairness with other agencies of water use before we agree to do anything that would harm our customers. I think 2-day-a-week is not unreasonable and can be managed and without a loss of, serious loss of landscape. But beyond that, I think that we have to take a real close look and also decide what areas of the city would be impacted. Would it be citywide or just areas that are really just isolated to that source of water? So there's some decisions and I can tell you, that Nancy right now is at a Met board meeting and they're talking about these very issues about how water gets allocated. And because it's us and particularly 2 other agencies, I guess also Inland Empire, so 3 other agencies, we want to make sure that everyone is playing by the same set of rules and playing to the extent that LA is playing before we do anything that is onerous on our customers. That's my position personally. And when we get a little more, we'll discuss it further and see if you're in agreement.
Thank you. That is, so just as I understand it, the expectation is that MWD will be implementing some new rules with respect to responding to the State Water Project allocation or decrease in allocation. And it is likely that again, in response to the same general set of issues that the department would recommend to the mayor and the council, that the city actually increase or step up its ordinance level, which would further constrain the use of water, balanced against or with recognition of the extremely high level of conservation that's already been achieved by residents of LA, and a sense that that burden needs to be shifted or needs to be borne region-wide and not concentrated in LA.
Absolutely.
That's the current thinking about where we're likely to be. All of which is to be revisited as things continue to progress. But our best thinking right now is that's what we're looking at. Yeah. And, and again, I think it's just important that we speak out loud where we are, because people do have to begin to think about how they're going to respond to what's occurring. And so much of what's occurring in the physical environment are things that we don't control. Are there any other questions on this presentation?
Yes. When you talk about the phases, where does the street trees, where does that fit in?
So the phases would not affect watering of trees. So our plan is if we have to restrict outdoor watering, that will allow, like I said, hand watering of trees so that we can keep all the trees alive. And we've done that in past droughts and to mitigate against any negative impact on trees.
If I could say, the other issue is also to work closely with Rec and Parks. They've done a lot to reduce their water use. We've partnered with them for years. They've done some turf reduction and native California planting where there's turf that's not used for recreation. But to the Commission President's point earlier about communities that you may don't have a lot of fancy landscapes, those people need parks, and parks are important. And so there's a huge public investment in the value of the park that we need to not lose, as well as we need to keep that opportunity available. So we work extremely close with the Rec and Parks Department to make sure that that's not a loss to the city during that time. And they've reduced their water use by close to 50% citywide, I think, in the last decades. So.
But what you're saying is that we're still allowed to water our street trees with the hose.
Yeah.
Right, because I had someone come to my house who said I couldn't water the tree and to stop watering the street tree.
I hope they weren't an employee of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Well, in fact, they were.
Maybe maybe it didn't. They might have said maybe it's not needed necessarily because once they're mature, they don't normally need water. So
No, it was a mature tree, and it was a nice looking tree.
It
I
was.
hope it's still alive.
I was going to say, I hope it still is.
a lot of
Yes.
buzzwords.
It's not so good looking now, but
Well, we're here to tell you that you are free to water that tree or any other tree in the city.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So at this point, we will go back to the board secretary to take public comment. Is there a public comment?
There are no callers for public comment. All public comment is now closed.
Thank you. And we will go back then to item H, consideration of items that have been recommended for approval. And with respect to those items, the ratepayer advocate has indicated that he has no comments. And we have withdrawn or deferred item 6. So is there a motion with respect to the remainder of the items on the calendar? I'm sorry, the remainder of the items on the agenda.
Commissioner, just for clarification, you would be recusing yourself from item 14.
So thank you for that. So we would be voting on items 1 through 5. We will be skipping 6 and then voting again on items 7 through 13.
And Commissioner, just to clarify, we'll have a little difficulty. We'll have to defer item 14 till the next board meeting because with your
Don't have a
recusal,
quorum.
we won't have a quorum.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I move approval for items L1 to 5, L7 to L13.
Second, would you call the roll?
President McCLAIN-HILL,
Aye.
Vice President Reyes,
Aye.
Commissioner BARAD-HOPKINS,
Aye.
3 ayes, motion's passed.
Terrific. Thank you for that. We'll go back to management presentations, and we can go now to item 1, which would be the presentation regarding our relationship with the Southern California Public Power Authority, also known as SCAPA.
Good morning. So SCAPA is a joint powers authority that was created 40 years ago to serve its members by creating generation and transmission projects and providing operational efficiencies and cost savings. Today's presentation will be an overview of SCAPA and its services to LADWP. And presenting today will be Simon Zodu, our Director of Transmission Planning, Regulatory and Innovation Division.
Good morning, Commissioners. Presentation will be to provide an update on an overview of Southern California Public Power Authority's SCAPA, shortly it's known as services to LADWP. If I may, I would like to start with provide some background on some information that's very pertinent on the circumstances that led to the creation of SCAPA. In 1973, oil supplies were cut off by the embargo by members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, known as OPEC, and a state of emergency was declared here in the city of Los Angeles, and an energy curtailment was adopted to mandate industrial, commercial, and residential customers to reduce their energy consumption. In response to this crisis, Los Angeles adopted at the time an ambitious goal of reducing its dependence on oil. To do so, two of the many actions taken were initiating feasibility studies for the Intermountain Power Project and purchase of a share of the Palo Verde nuclear power project. So by the late 1970s, it became evident that the ratepayers of Los Angeles and other Southern California municipal utilities would not be able to finance the construction, acquisition of new generation and transmission facilities on their own. So as a result, in 1979, it was recommended that LADWP expedite the formation of a contractual relationship with other municipal utilities to gain the benefit of new financing techniques at the time and sharing of and developing of operating facilities. To that end, steps were taken to form what we know as a joint action agency to handle several projects. The same year, California state amended through its law through AB 1790 to allow the use of revenue bonds to finance generation and transmission projects. In 1980, the Department of LADWP's Board of Commissioners and the LA City Council approved LADWP to lead the effort to form SCAPA and to become a founding member. So following that, in 1981, SCAPA purchased its first project with a 6% stake in the Palo Verde nuclear generation project. 40 years later, today, SCAPA is within the top 3 joint action agencies in the nation. And in terms of energy supply, it serves more than 5 million Californians and 2 million customers. SCAPA is a joint venture of 11 municipal utilities and 1 irrigation district, the Imperial Irrigation District. Shown in this slide are the 2 members of SCAPA. The members are responsible for all costs, obligations, and liabilities and receive the benefits of SCAPA.
Is there an allocation of cost?
I didn't hear that.
Is there an allocation of costs? So do the members bear cost equally, or is there a percentage allocation of cost?
Allocation is done based on a resolution passed by the SCAPA board, and as well as administrative and general cost expenditures that are blended into the benefits that each utility receives.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's proportional, is that right? Correct.
Some of it, excuse me, some of it is proportional, some of it's based on, so there are a number of projects in SCAPA. So if you're not in that project, you don't bear the costs that are related to that project. There are some general costs that relate to public benefit programs and other services that SCAPA offers that are allocated based on your participation.
So I guess I just want to be just very transparent. I'm interested in what SCAPA costs, how much of that cost is borne by the Department of Water and Power. So is that part of this presentation, or do we have that number?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. Next slide is on the benefits of SCAPA. SCAPA basically provides a mechanism for joint planning, financing, construction, and maintenance of transmission and generation projects. Related to energy efficiency, in 2005, the Public Utilities Code, Section 9615, was adopted requiring all the utilities to first include available energy efficiency and demand-side management reduction programs as part of their generation stack. Accordingly, SCAPA supports all its members through the programs of energy efficiency and demand reduction until today. SCAPA also promotes collaborative advocacy to support joint projects and to address some common challenges faced by public utilities. Last but not least, SCAPA provides operational efficiencies and cost savings through economies of scale of joint procurement and low-cost financing. From LADWP's perspective, financing of projects through SCAPA for renewables and other clean energy resources frees up borrowing capacity on its balance sheet for core infrastructure and power system reliability program work. And this basically removes some pressure for debt service coverage and preserves our debt capacity for future capital projects. This slide lists the various services available to SCAPA members. They include various working groups, a robust training portfolio, contracts and agreements that are accessible, low-cost project debt financing, system operations and maintenance responsibilities, and renewable and energy storage procurement through power purchasing agreements.
So how many people are employed by SCAPA? How large is their staff?
I would estimate there's about a dozen employees. The value of SCAPA is it's largely member driven. So it's the member staff that run working groups and do all the analysis. It's not SCAPA that does it. It's members that are interested in those projects or programs. They do have staff that help coordinate, and they do have staff that help on the regulatory. They're the main face when we deal with the CEC and CARB and others for regulations related to public power.
No, I'm just trying to understand the capacity of SCAPA to provide to DWP certain quote unquote services as they're articulated here. And again, I'm wanting to be very transparent. My concern really is around mission scope. Because in my time on the board, I've seen a number of procurements move through SCAPA that had nothing to do with, financing of projects or things of that nature. And I've become, I was always concerned. I've now become, hypersensitive to procurement practices that circumvent the department and that move through an entity that gives it some appearance of arm's distance, but that, may not provide the level of transparency or control, frankly, that the department should have with respect to procurement. So, and I'm very skeptical of, I'm curious about, so for instance, contracts and agreements. What does that mean? Is someone providing services to DWP, SCAPA providing contracts and agreement services to DWP? And is it, low-cost project debt financing, I understand. But systems operation and maintenance responsibility, SCAPA's doing that?
If I may respond to that.
Yes, sir.
The system maintenance and operations, the department is an operating agent on two of our transmission projects, the Southern Transmission System and the Mid-Atlanta. We do have full responsibility to maintain and operate those lines. So that responsibility flows into LADWP, but other utilities, if they want to be operating agent as well, they can participate. But for now, DWP has at least two projects that we are operating agents for. So SCAPA plays a facilitation role, if you may. And once these projects are financed and operation can be overtaken by, elected by LADWP.
And then with respect to renewable and energy storage procurement, again, this agency of 12 is overseeing procurement for us. And then the project comes to us after they've done the due diligence. Is that the way this is working?
Correct. The power purchasing agreement will be signed by SCAPA with the developers, and the LADWP will sign a power service agreement.
And who's doing the due diligence? Because I know what it takes on our end to do this work.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand as we delegate this to or outsource it to another entity, how we are ensuring on how this works, what the benefit of that is, or how that is preferable to due diligence being done internal.
I think we'll address those in subsequent slides.
Okay, I'll stop asking questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on, I think we just want to, on subsequent slides, I will provide some summary or additional information on each of the services provided by SCAPA. The first one is the working groups. Since the mid-1990s, the electric industry has experienced a lot of unprecedented restructuring and changes. To enhance value to its members, SCAPA services have also evolved over the years. As a result, working groups representing the various functional areas of member utilities were created to address multiple industry challenges. So listed here are the 11 SCAPA working groups. These provide a forum to discuss, collaborate on, and address essential and common utility practices and challenges. LADWP plays an active role in all these working groups. While we're talking about working groups, I would like to highlight one great example of a working group, which is a regulatory and legislative working group, which has done a very indispensable and valuable benefit to the department. The working group obtains a collaborative consensus amongst members on providing comments to regulation modifications and proposals. It coordinates meetings with appropriate agency staff, mostly state of California agency staff, to clarify and preempt regulation changes that may be unreasonable to public power. It ensures members are fully informed of their regulatory obligations and critical impacts. It also assists in helping members keep track of the multitude of regulations and review possible fixes in the future. This is done in collaboration with SCAPA's office in Sacramento. And in addition to the working group also coordinates and provides regulatory perspective to the legislative group on upcoming legislation, and that could pose challenges from a regulation standpoint. So in the past, the working group has defended rules such as the California Air Resources Board cap and trade programs to support investments in our greenhouse gas reduction efforts. It has supported rules that maintained local control and decision-making on wildfire mitigation plans. And also, it has helped shape our renewable enforcement regulations regarding long-term procurement requirements with the California Energy Commission. The working group is still engaged in many proceedings at this time that are in progress that could be critical and impact our reliability in terms of planning. These include the implementation of the Senate Bill 100, the load management standards by the California Energy Commission, and CARB's Advanced Clean Fleet rules and scoping plan.
And are they significantly different from the Municipal Utilities Association, which also has exists for this kind of legislative engagement?
Primarily, the advocacy is related to municipal utility business and how we stand it as opposed to regulations.
Sometimes Southern California has a very different perspective from Northern California. And a perfect example is when they were implementing cap and trade. And in Southern California, a lot of our resources were fossil-based versus Northern California that were hydro-based. So depending on how those rules were implemented, it could have been very detrimental to
No,
Southern.
I understand, but the function is similar, correct?
Similar, CMUA is water also, whereas SCAPA and NCPA.
I get it, but it's similar. It's
Similar.
essentially
Yes.
I mean, from a legislative perspective, it's essentially a forum in which the various agencies are collaborating and presenting a common voice to these various regulatory bodies.
Correct, but CMUA often has differences, so they can't stake a position where it's unified throughout California. So it is another vehicle where you can get, 5 million
No,
residents.
I'm not suggesting that they're duplicative. I'm just saying that they're similar.
Similar, yes.
In terms of how they operate and how they're functioning in this space. And with respect to, say, going back, I said I was going to stop asking questions, so I'm going to stop. Go ahead. I'll let you continue.
CMUA doesn't do procurement, though. They're largely.
No, I understand that we get similar services without surrendering any control over any of our operational components, but go ahead.
SCAPA also provides training relevant to industry topics. It hosts a lot of workshops facilitated by industry experts, and they have hired consultants in the past to provide important market updates to its members. SCAPA Training Center was designed to provide SCAPA members with a variety of customized, locally hosted training courses. Some of the advantages of SCAPA's in-house training are cost savings for its members, increased collaboration, and member staff development. Classes include what's listed here in power system operations, finance-related professional development, and integration of new technologies and industry practices.
And is this all funded? Well, you have a slide on SCAPA's funding somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
Good. This slide is for services and professional service contracts that LADWP has participated in SCAPA. The blue table lists the various users within LADWP of SCAPA service and professional service contracts and the corresponding expenditures in fiscal year 21 and 22. These are a total of 60 service and professional service contracts. The green table, on the other hand, shows the selection methods of such contracts. And I would like to note that under the sole source category, 13 out of the 25 contracts shown there, more than half, are for training services. And these are the expenditures for the past 2 years. Moving on, for renewable procurement, SCAPA has a rolling or continuously advertised request for proposal process where members can identify opportunities to participate in renewable projects. Members can be the sole participant or share in projects to strategically leverage operational efficiencies and cost savings through joint procurement and financing of projects.
Is the financing and the procurement, are those tied?
Hi.
Tied, meaning in order to secure the benefit of financing projects, is there a requirement that the procurement be done through SCAPA?
There's no requirement, but there are some savings derived from those.
Okay.
Yes. In terms of benefits for renewable procurement, SCAPA provides outside expert in preparing some power purchasing agreement term sheets. It also provides consulting services to evaluate project finances and owner's representation on complex projects. Here is a list of projects. In terms of transmission and generation projects, SCAPA has a total of 46 projects, and LADWP is a participant in 24 of those. LADWP participates in conventional projects such as transmission, as well as 19 renewable projects. Shown in the green table are the various types of SCAPA renewable projects. And the table also shows the breakdown of the 19 renewable projects where LADWP is a participant. Renewable projects are organized under a power purchasing agreement, a mechanism, as municipalities do not qualify for investment tax credits. SCAPA has negotiated agreements to obtain the maximum benefit of these investment tax credits in the form of lower power purchasing agreement prices.
And again, you said 12 employees?
That's an estimate. I'm not sure exactly the
I think,
number. We did get that.
15 to 20, it's been fluctuating, but less than 20, I would say. So by spreading among multiple project participants, SCAPA has been successful in lowering project financing risk for the organizations and thereby lowering the debt service cost for the project participants. This slide shows a table that was 3 transmission and 1 generation SCAPA projects and LADWP's share of those. They are the Palo Verde nuclear generating station, the Southern Transmission System, where SCAPA issued a low-cost tax-exempt bond financing for cost of acquisition and construction of the 490 miles transmission line from Intermountain Power Project in Utah all the way through California. Also listed are the Mid-Adelanto Transmission and the Mid-Phoenix Transmission projects. The next 2 slides list in detail the 19 SCAPA projects since 2007 that where LADWP is a leading participant, and each project's corresponding renewable percentage towards LADWP's renewable portfolio. So on the second slide, you would see the Eland and the Red Cloud projects providing a significant amount of renewable percentages to LADWP's portfolio. This table summarizes the LADWP's various expenditures to SCAPA. They range from membership to training, services and professional services, and obligations to power purchasing agreements. Getting a membership through SCAPA provides an advantage of cost savings. A lion's share of the listed membership that you see is allocated to the American Public Power Association, or APPA, and a relatively small amount is for the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA. SEPA helps electric utilities implement and deploy clean energy and distributed resources. So the summary, this is a summary of all the tables that were presented on earlier slides. In essence, SCAPA has been and will continue to be an invaluable resource to the LADWP and its members in providing a series of critical services that translate into significant cost savings and also lowering of project financing risk. It provides a forum of collaboration and joint actions, professional development of staff through training, and an indispensable voice, an advocate for public power and joint projects. From an advocacy standpoint, having this joint action or a joint utility public power coalition has been, and such as the one that SCAPA is providing, has more weight and has positive results in influencing outcomes. And that has paid dividends for LADWP in the past, and it will continue, it continues to this day. The next slide is an item that you, Madam President, that you mentioned earlier, which is recently there were some developments and reports that made us look into how we can inject improvements into our processes, especially internal processes. Listed here are some potential measures for consideration to further increase transparency and improve accountability in the way we deal with SCAPA. These measures are considered as opportunities to improve or for improving our internal processes and due diligence while continuing to receive services from SCAPA. The first one is to process and to all contracts and for services and professional services through LADWP's supply chain services. For all contracts to go through our procurement process internally. In the event where the contracts or these professional service contracts are justified to be processed by SCAPA, we are proposing that a pre-approval exemption be required by from three different offices within LADWP. The Director of Supply Chain Services, the respective Senior Assistant General Manager of the system requesting the service, and LADWP's Inspector General Office. Third, a neutral and third-party review and benchmarking of the existing utility-scale renewable procurement process through SCAPA to be performed so that we can benchmark and review the current process and see how we can improve it. Also, a quarterly high-level SCAPA contracts and expenditures report to be provided. This will include approved exemptions as well, to be provided to the Water and Power Board of Commissioners on a quarterly basis, and an annual detailed expenditure report to be provided to the Water and Power Board of Commissioners. And for LADWP's representative on SCAPA's board to be responsible for ensuring compliance with LADWP's board recommendations. So with that, we're very also, of course, we're very open to any additional recommendations that may come from the Water and Power Board of Commissioners. With that, I will conclude my presentation and would be very happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Are there any questions?
Would you safely say that LADWP bears the majority of what the expenses and the participation in the scope of work that SCAPA is doing?
That's correct.
And are we, in terms of the budget for SCAPA, how does that play out in terms of our role, and are we reimbursed in any shape or fashion, or we absorb some costs?
There are costs to all the services we receive from SCAPA, but because of our scale and how large we are, the cost savings for us is much higher compared to other members. And SCAPA has worked for the department in terms of cost savings. And at the region as well, I think LADWP has played a role in terms of working with other municipal utilities, especially from a power, a public power perspective. So in terms of budget, I think we can get additional data from SCAPA in terms of the breakdown of LADWPs versus others and how much they contribute. But we pay for all the services that we get from SCAPA. But at the same time,
I'd like to add, we have a SCAPA office in the Financial Services Organization that provides accounting and does
You say we have a SCAPA office, you mean SCAPA employees are here?
They're DWP employees, and we get completely reimbursed from SCAPA and the participants that are in those projects for.
But do we get reimbursed with our own money? Or do we get, when I say that, because if we're paying them and they give us money back, that's not getting reimbursed.
There's a SCAPA annual budget process, and they are audited by Moss Adams every year. So we can report back on how much of SCAPA billings are paid by LADWP versus the other 11 participants.
But I would assume that you have some order of magnitude. I mean, is it 50%? Is it 20%? Is it 70%?
I would assume it's at least 50% because we're much larger than any other participant in SCAPA. But it's really, I think the benefits outweigh the costs. So, but we could definitely report back.
Well, and when you say the benefits, you really mean the financing benefits, correct? Because there's absolutely nothing else that's been presented that we can't do without them.
I think the
there's the financing benefits, and then there is the collaboration around regulatory legislative engagement, but I mean, everyone has a mutual interest in that. So those kinds of coalitions and collaborations are formed independent of the kind of delegations of authority that we've given to SCAPA. And when I say mission creep, I mean, if I'm looking at contracts, we've got, $55 million in professional contracts that would otherwise move through the department that are moving through SCAPA. That seems like a pretty significant delegation of authority from this board, because that's essentially what's occurred. We've shifted review to SCAPA of things that would otherwise happen here. Training, these have nothing to do with why SCAPA was originally formed, and even memberships in the APPA and SEPA paid through SCAPA. I mean, we can pay our own memberships to these organizations, correct?
Yeah, I think it's based on the number of members. So if we include the entire region, I believe we get a break in the price.
How big a break?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, but I'm just saying that, and then I also know that the administrative overhead is at some level borne by this department. I mean, it's just ludicrous if we're talking about an entity of 11,000 people. And if you just look at the size of our joint operations, so our internal services operations, or even just the size of FSO, to suggest that somehow this tiny, staffed entity is actually providing services and capacity to DWP, independent of the capacity to finance and to seek certain kinds of efficiencies with respect to bonds, et cetera. That is, so we have that balanced against the completely opaque nature of the operations. So once it gets to SCAPA, we see it as a SCAPA contract fully formed with, sort of assurances that everything's been done well and properly. And my confidence in those assurances have plummeted pretty significantly. I appreciate and will certainly chalk it up to the extreme competence and preparedness of the presenters, that there are good recommendations anticipating a number of concerns that the commission should consider with respect to SCAPA, including, things as basic as a, frequent reports on what's occurring. I would certainly like to consider, both with council and with others, other commissioners and our ratepayer advocate who may have some comments about this, how we proceed. But certainly these circumstances where we make up the lion's share of the financial participation and also other participation and give up pretty significant controls in order for the benefit of others' collaboration is definitely something that I think bears a new look as we look at JPAs in generally. Did you have any other comments?
I would just like to see the scope be narrower to where it's absolutely needed, where that collaboration and the joint, contracts, because of the magnitude of the benefits that it will bring to us. Whereas we're talking about, say, training, there's minimal. We can do that ourselves, and really to to look at the future where we could make a difference and SCAPA could make a difference in terms of our infrastructure work, for example. So just revisiting it from time to time as to the scope of the work that's there and probably, assessing where it's most meaningful and where we can get the most bang for our buck, because we are majority of the participation in SCAPA.
Commissioner BARAD-HOPKINS.
As I remember from being at that conference, was it 2 years ago in New Orleans, that most of the people there were members of boards that were either power or water. That we were one of the few that combined water and power.
Yeah, everybody else there would have been power. Some would have water, but the majority of those would be power.
Would be power, yeah.
Dr. Pickle, did you have any comments on this presentation?
Yes. First, a historical comment. Starting in the 1930s, the electric business had grown to a scale where people were starting to sell wholesale power between each other and adding transmission to do so. And with that, generation grew in scale. And the industry moved toward joint ventures as a way of addressing the financial risks of these major projects. And that continues to this day. And SCAPA is clearly an entity that's trying to created to reduce those costs of financing and creating those joint ventures for Southern California entities. And it's good to have a team that's very experienced in that, although I think one of the more spectacular joint ventures is the Intermountain Power Project that has involved a joint agreement of more than 35 or more parties. So that component is important. If you look at, I was busily trying to add up the population of the various member cities. And as I quickly tried to do that, I had a question for Reiko. Does the city of Riverside utilities just serve the city of Riverside?
Correct.
Okay. So as I tried to count out the bigger cities, I came up with a total population of 1.3 million. Compared to city of LA's 4 million. So it's a little bit like what I call elephant and rabbit stew. There's some good sized rabbits here. But then again, there's a really tiny rabbit, the unusual city of Vernon, exceptional in many ways with a total population of 112. And so I see some areas of savings are very small potential because they're just small expenditures to begin with. The joint expenditures on APPA, the training, they're small expenditures. I see how they benefit the other members far more than they would benefit us. But as soon as we get into the renewables procurements, we can get there's a standardized way of getting people on board. The biggest problem I have with some of that is the transparency in the process. And so I think moves toward greater transparency in that process is more important. Especially now, given the commercial nature, some of it has to be confidential while under negotiation, but I think it's important that a broader range of people within the organization, including board members, treat these like real estate transactions that in many cases they are, and have that so that's more visible. Camden, do you have anything else that would be appropriate to have? So those are my comments.
Thank you for that. I appreciate any other questions and comments about this?
Just one comment. All of the PPAs and purchase power agreements and all the financing does come to the board and city council.
and we can provide all the resolutions in the past. It never went past this board or the city council. And even some of the large expenditures under efficiency, I think that may have also come to the board for approval before SCAPA took on. So one of the things we could report back on is which of these expenditures did we have board resolutions associated with them, allowing us to use SCAPA as the process?
No, I appreciate that. And again, it's not a critique necessarily of well, maybe it is. I think that there's process and there's substance. And understanding what it is we're trying to achieve in every instance becomes really critical. And things change over time. So one of the things that I'm pretty clear about is that the level and degree and the nature of our utilization of SCAPA has changed significantly over time, and that needs to be revisited and narrowed. In addition to that, just as a board member, I do have some real concerns about some of the significant work done around purchase power agreements and the level at which the department is leading the diligence and the review on the front end of those agreements, as opposed to them coming to this board fully negotiated with some assurance that all of that's been competently handled via SCAPA. I'm loath to believe that the expertise at this department and the benefit of having one's own counsel who is responsible to and whose fiduciary relationship is to this department is somehow outweighed by a process which puts SCAPA front and center. So in my view, reversing that process so that it's significantly vetted by the department and moves to SCAPA at the point of financing might be a more appropriate way to proceed. And then quite frankly, SCAPA has been used as a place to circumvent procurement, just, plain and simple. And that is simply not an appropriate use of SCAPA. I will be interested in a follow-up report that breaks down the SCAPA budget and the DWP's, LADWP's contribution to that budget, both in terms of hard dollars, also in terms of services provided. And while we do get significant, I suspect, financing benefit, I would certainly imagine that Wall Street is not easily or blind to obligations that this department has through SCAPA. So those numbers are counted as our overall credit worthiness is being thought through because, there's nothing there to back it up except the department's commitment. So, we have to just be transparent about that as well. And I look forward to continuing this review and working with some internal resources in council, certainly be back with a motion to move forward some of the recommendations and others. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough and very easy to understand.
Thank you.
It's noon. Is it possible can we take a I'm sorry, a break?
It was like 5 o'clock at night.
So yeah, we're already at noon. Why don't we take a 30-minute break and come back so that
What should we do then?
There's
What should we do during our break?
we could do lunch and come back. I think if that works, will we maintain our quorum if we break for that long?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we'll be in recess for 30 minutes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Reggie, will you let us know when the mics are down?
Please
Gentlemen.
maintain silence until all mics are turned off.
This meeting is being recorded.
President McCLAIN-HILL,
Present.
Vice President Reyes,
Present.
Commissioner BARAD-HOPKINS,
Present.
members of a quorum.
Thank you. And our next presentation is the 2022 Power Strategic Long-Term Resource Plan Update. And while the presenters are coming to the mic, I have two announcements that I'd like to make, one of which I should have made at the top of the meeting, and the other is hot off the presses. So first and foremost, there's a new voice and a new presence at our board meeting, and that is our brand new board secretary. I'd like to welcome her to the commission, Shantae Mitchell. Been doing a magnificent job for your very first board meeting, actually a magnificent job in general.
Thank you.
And then hot off the presses, we have a departure, which we will more fully recognize at our next board meeting, but it has been announced now that our very own Board of Commission Vice President, SUSANA Reyes, will become a member of the Board of Public Works. So we'll be leaving the Department of Water and Power and leaving our commission, a loss for which I am just tragically disturbed, but joining, staying within the city family, going to the Board of Public Works, where she will be extraordinarily helpful on all of our initiatives. And in particular, I think, given her focus on sanitation, our initiatives with respect to Operation Next. So those are my two announcements before we move back.
I see you, AC.
And we will have a great deal more to say about this at upcoming board meetings, but didn't want anybody to be in the dark now that it is publicly released by the mayor's office. So with that, back to our presentation, and sir.
Thank you. Jason wanted to have a few words.
Yes. Thanks, James. So I wanted to just share an award that we recently received that's related to this presentation. And Reiko, thank you for obliging. In the past, we get awards and recognize them internally, and we're really proud of them. But this one in particular, I thought really deserved to have the attention of our board and to be discussed and have the folks that were involved in this recognized publicly. This is an award that was given to our power system and to our external and regulatory affairs personnel from the Electric Power Research Institute. So you hear EPRI often. That's an organization that was set up in 1965 following a regional blackout in the northeastern United States that took 30 million customers off of power. And that entity was set up to ensure that there was research and scientific grounding in the electric industry. We often use EPRI today to vet emerging and innovative technologies such as energy storage, hydrogen, long duration energy storage, and many other areas. And we also use EPRI and partner with EPRI on studies. One of those studies we won an award for, and that study is called the Climate Assessment and Transmission Resilience Analysis. So what this analysis did is it looked at various climate impacts such as precipitation, temperature, sea level rise, drought, and importantly, wildfire. And I think a number of us remember here back in 2019 when the Saddle Ridge fire had a very extraordinary impact on our power system that really went largely under the radar. And I'll talk why it went under the radar in just a quick second. Prior to the Saddle Ridge fire, there was an announcement from the mayor to not repower our ocean-cooled units. And it was up to our power system to figure out how can we address that challenge? How can we meet that challenge in a way that maintains our resiliency and maintains our reliability and successfully decarbonizes the power system? We know that working with our operational folks, they recognize that this is a very serious operational challenge that we need to meet. And later that year, the Saddle Ridge fire occurred in October. It was a fire that took out our import capability for all three of our transmission corridors. And we were very fortunate in that it was a very low heat day. It was a day that was very similar to today. But it was in October, a day that could have very easily been a high heat day. And as we remember several days ago, it was a very high heat day. The reason that went under the radar is because we did not lose power, but we were very, very close to doing so. And so that was a reminder that in the future, as we decarbonize, it is extraordinarily important for us to maintain resilience. Why does resilience matter? It does matter for many reasons, but I'll talk about two. One is electrification of our buildings and our transportation sector. We know that that has extraordinary importance for the success of our decarbonization efforts, but it also has extraordinary benefits for local air quality. Resilience and reliability matters because we need to be able to support electrification, and to do that, we need reliable power. It also matters because of human lives. The LA Times released a study back in 2021 of October, where it cited a pretty substantial undercounting of deaths related to heat illnesses. There was an official count of about 600 deaths over the last decade. The analysis found about 6 times higher than that, nearly 4,000 deaths over the last decade. That disproportionately impacts the poor Californians and locally as well here. So that is why that matters. So it brings us back to what is successful decarbonization. The board president mentioned earlier about our values. When we talk about decarbonization, we talk about doing it in a way that's equitable, in a way that does not sacrifice resiliency and reliability, and in a way that supports jobs. Studies like this help us do that. Studies like this underpin our ability to build power plans that do not sacrifice reliability and resiliency. And so that is why I thought this was so extraordinarily important to bring to the board, to share with the board, to really show where the department is leading in these areas. So I want to close by just recognizing a few staff members that really played a huge role in this. You're seeing a presentation from James Barner, who really, over the last several years, led the effort in power planning, and in many ways led the state's effort to adopt integrated resource planning and played a leadership role. But what we learned over the last several years is that power planning can't meet the needs of our future, and that it really needs to be a cross-functional effort across all of the power system that engages our public as well. This award was for a study that included 4 different divisions within the power system and 2 different systems. So there were personnel across all the spectrum that played a role in this. And I'd like to just mention a few of their names now. Glenn Berry, Jonathan Flores, Luis Jose Martinez, Julie Van Wagner, Robert Hodel, Farnak Sarbaz, Vin Vangvaravapatar, Jay Lim, Mark Sedlicek, and James Wells. And a special shout out for Julie Van Wagner, who really played a lead role in coordinating this across the power system. I know working in the power system is really hard to coordinate. She's outside of the power system, and she got this thing done and got it across the finish line, and it was an extraordinary job by her. Great job. I'd like to wrap up, and sorry for taking such a short, such a long time, but as you can tell, I'm really enthusiastic about this, and I just am extraordinarily proud, and I feel lucky to be working with these folks. I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to Reiko and to Nancy Sutley, because they recognized that after this announcement happened and after our power system was really challenged by these really aggressive goals, that the way that we planned the power system in the past would not meet the challenge of the future. And they established a cross-divisional and a cross-system steering committee that led to this study, that led to the groups that came together that said, we need to meet this challenge in a way that's grounded in science and grounded in engineering. So I just really wanted to take a moment to thank you. I assume there's no questions on this, and I really hope there's no technical questions on this because I can't answer them. But unless there's any questions on this, I'll hand it off to James to give an update on the SLTRP. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. James Barner, Assistant Director of Resource Planning, Development and Programs. Pleased to bring the resource plan update. We call it the Strategic Long-Term Resource Plan. In the past, we call it the IRP. And firstly, I'd just like to give a little background because the LA 100 study was so important to what we're doing now. The LA 100 study was completed this last year, and the final report was issued on March 24th, 2021. There were many key findings of the study, first of which is that 100% renewable energy is achievable through multiple pathways, and that electrification is the key to affordability. We learned about the cost impacts on rates, job creation, as well as resources that are common investments across all pathways to 100%. Following the completion of the study, the Los Angeles City Council has instructed LADWP to include in its planning the new goal of reaching 100% carbon-free by 2035, a full 10 years ahead of California's goal. So you may be familiar with this. This was presented to you in March of last year. These are the LA 100 next steps. This was an attempt to minimize the delay between receiving the LA 100 study findings and then developing the SLTP recommendations. The LA next steps through this is our recommended next steps through 2030. That include near-term investments and supporting efforts needed to keep us moving forward towards our clean energy future. The first of the steps is accelerating to 80% renewable and achieving 97% GHG free by 2030. Accelerating transmission. There was 10 major projects within the city that we needed to complete in order to bring power into the city and minimize the use of our gas-fired generation. We also had transforming local generation. We issued a green hydrogen request for information on this, and we have plans to construct green hydrogen capacity at Scattergood and to expand hydrogen use within the basin. We're also taking steps to retrofit Haynes 8 to use recycled water for cooling. And then accelerating energy storage to build over 1,000 megawatts of energy storage within the basin and out of basin by 2030. And then accelerating distributed energy resources equitably, deploying 1,000 megawatts of local solar, 500 megawatts of demand response, doubling of energy efficiency, and providing EV charging support for 580,000 vehicles by 2030. And adopting a goal of 50% of DER investment to disadvantaged communities. And this will be more fully considered as part of the LA 100 equity strategies effort that is now underway. So what I'd like to do is show you the progress that we've made internally to date on these next steps. LADWP is actively engaged in executing these next steps and has made significant progress to date. We've provided 55% clean energy so far, and this year with the addition of Red Cloud Wind, we expect to be over 61% clean energy. And this does not yet include the additional benefits of the Elan Solar and Storage project that is scheduled for commercial operation by the end of 2023 that will provide an additional 7% renewable energy, clean energy. Regarding the transmission projects, we've made progress on two of those transmission progress, Toluca to Hollywood Line 1 and Tarzana Olympic Line 1 are both in permitting phase, and internal staff has been assigned to these major projects. These two projects, along with the other 8 transmission projects, are part of our regular biweekly major projects meetings, where we discuss the implementation schedule and identify any delays or project obstacles to overcome. Regarding local generation progress, we've received 36 responses from the recently issued green hydrogen RFI. And these responses are now being reviewed, and we are currently seeking external funding opportunities for green hydrogen with the Department of Energy and the state. Scattergood hydrogen capacity and the Haynes recycled water cooling retrofit are currently ongoing. With energy storage, we expect to have 1/3 of our energy storage needs in place by 2023, by the end of 2023, with the existing 20 megawatts of Beacon energy storage and the 287.5 megawatts of Elan battery energy storage, and the balance coming from small customer-sited energy storage. Our goal is to use and maximize the use of solar plus storage investment tax credits to install energy storage outside of the basin, combined with solar PV. In February, we issued a standalone energy storage rolling RFP through SCAPA and we intend to pilot and demonstrate a long-duration energy storage project for potential use within Scattergood and our other generating stations. Lastly, we've made progress to expand our distributed energy resource programs to reach more customers in disadvantaged communities, and additional findings and recommendations that will evolve from the LA100 equity strategy study currently underway will be incorporated into the SLTRP process as these recommendations become available. So how does the SLTRP fit into our overall LA100? So I mentioned the LA100 study was the first of its kind. It gained significant recognition on a national level and really put LADWP in the spotlight as a front runner in accelerating clean energy. To build on this effort, LADWP will be moving forward with our remaining 2 of the 3 major LA100 initiatives illustrated here. The LA100 study was completed in March, as I mentioned, and showed multiple pathways to 100% renewables by 2035 and 2045. We also learned through the LA100 study that LADWP must be intentional in its planning efforts to ensure an equitable, just transition towards 100% clean energy. And to that end, LADWP launched its LA100 equity strategies effort with NREL that will include robust engagement with our community. The LA100 equity strategies is a significant effort to ensure that the transition to a clean energy future is done in a manner that is just and equitable so that all our communities benefit. In short, we need to transition in a way that considers the financial and air quality burdens on these communities. The 2022 SLTRP is our traditional long-term plan that is currently well underway with an extensive advisory group that incorporates research findings from LA100 and builds upon the resource pathways that were identified in the LA100 study. I will be sharing more on the SLTRP in the following slides. So just a little background, what is an LADWP's SLTRP? It's a roadmap that drives the financial priorities of the power system to meet LA's future energy needs, considers regulatory mandates while assessing how to drive emissions reductions and maintain reliability and resiliency in a cost-effective manner. The last SLTRP that we produced was in 2017, and for the last 4 years, it was paused while we worked on the LA100 study. Now that the LA100 study is complete, the 2022 SLTRP will build on that prior LA100 study effort. This year's 2022 SLTRP will incorporate several city council motions that were approved following the completion of the LA100 study. And the strategic long-term resource plan guides our internal power system investments and workforce to achieve 100% carbon-free by 2035, while also considering that we need to maintain this 100% through 2045, not just 2035, with continued load growth due to higher levels of electrification. And because of the unprecedented challenge of 100% carbon-free by 2035, the SLTRP will also be supported by parallel efforts that are underway, such as the Integrated Human Resources Plan, as well as a number of risk assessments that will include implementation and constructability risks, procurement risks, operations and maintenance risks, and supply chain risks. So shown here is a snapshot of the overall 2022 SLTRP timeline that we've been following. The key milestones here, we kicked off the process on September 23rd, 2021. We've held a series of 7 AG advisory group meetings from September through December, and we're currently conducting SLTRP modeling is underway. The preliminary results are targeted for the end of April. This April, and public meetings are expected to start in May 2021, and completion and board approval is targeted for September of this year. We are now in the modeling phase that you can see here in the middle. It says conduct modeling in that large arrow there in the middle. This builds on the LA100 modeling approach and methodology and includes similar approaches used in that study. That includes capacity expansion modeling to determine what to build, when, and how much on least cost, best fit. Resource adequacy modeling to simulate weather patterns to determine reliability metrics such as loss of load probability, capacity shortfall. And production cost modeling that includes hourly simulations of the power system over the next 23 years to determine key metrics such as emissions, output, costs, et cetera. And then the public outreach, we'll talk about that a little bit in the upcoming slides. So the scenario overview here that you see represents a simplified version of what was developed with input from the advisory group over the last 7 AG meetings. These scenarios capture the breadth of feedback received from the AG. This year's 2022 SLTRP will evaluate 3 core scenarios relative to the reference case, which is state law of SB 100. So that's on the far left there. That's the SB 100, which is used as a reference case to be able to compare sort of the results of the other cases to state law. All cases, number 1s through 3, will achieve 100% carbon free by 2035. There are minor differences between the 3 cases. Case 1, for instance, achieves an 80% RPS interim target, whereas case 2 and 3 achieve a higher 90% interim target by 2030. The difference between cases 2 and 3 is that case 3 includes an attempt to maximize DER, or distributed energy resource deployments in basin. The assumptions between the case scenarios have been updated based on the latest information available such as electrification load, forecast, pricing of renewables and energy storage based on NREL's annual technology baseline, along with other sources from our own internal LADWP subject matter experts. This was a tremendous effort to coordinate all of the data points with various groups and update and benchmark the model for analysis. So I'd like to talk about the sensitivities. As with previous resource plans, this year's SLTRP will conduct price sensitivities to evaluate bookends on how cost can trend both low and high. This helps LADWP evaluate risk in terms of the range that power system costs may experience in the future. The key sensitivities to the 3 cases include fuel prices, GHG prices, renewable and energy storage prices. More recently, we have seen supply chain impacts and inflation resulting in an upward pressure on prices across many commodities, and these recent changes will be incorporated in the modeling. The what-if sensitivities are more complex than price sensitivities, and the SLTRP will more fully address risks that we could encounter often beyond LADWP's control. I want to emphasize that the LA100 study did not consider implementation risks, whereas the 2022 SLTRP will consider these implementation risks in the what-if sensitivities. So some of these what-if sensitivities, such as emerging technologies, such as long-duration energy storage that may be not technologically and commercially ready, customer-sided programs that rely on customer participation and uptake that might not necessarily occur as expected, transmission permitting and construction delays, and load uncertainties due to electrification of transportation and buildings. The SLTRP will evaluate the impacts related to cost, emissions, and reliability for all the scenarios and the what-if sensitivities. So shown here is the overall meeting plan that we have. As I mentioned before, we've completed the 7th AG meeting and are currently in the modeling phase. The total plan includes 10 AG meetings throughout 2021, And here it describes the content and the discussions that were included in each of these meetings when we met. The advisory group included many of the same members from the LA 100 study process, so we could provide consistency between the LA 100 and SLTRP efforts. We have expanded the number of AG members and the number of meetings considerably, where, for example, the 2017 SLTRP included 25 AG members, and this year we've doubled that to 50 members. And the number of meetings has doubled as well, from 5 meetings in 2017 to now 10 meetings this year. So here's some feedback that we received from the advisory group. I'd also like to mention, because the slide looks like it's missing here, but we really couldn't do this without the help of NREL and Community Affairs. They really helped out in the outreach with our AG in reviewing presentations, helping with follow-up questions and coordinating these meetings. So they've been really very helpful in that. And really want to give thanks to Joe Romalo and his team, Stephanie Spicer, Carol Tucker, and Don Cotterell, who have been really helpful in this process. So the advisory group feedback, this is really a very distilled version of what we heard. We heard a lot of comments. Some of the comments that we heard is the scenario should meet the requirements of the city council motion for the 100% carbon free by 2035, and California SB 100 being included as a reference case. So we have done that, as you've seen. There was another comment regarding beyond 100% carbon free, where some AG members advocated for a no combustion scenario with long duration energy storage in place of green hydrogen turbines. Hydrogen is there's still a lot of issues that the group had pointed out that it's not well understood, and they wanted us to look more deeply into the cost, safety, environmental impacts, and in many communities, more discussion was felt that needed to take place regarding hydrogen. To address the no combustion scenario request, we've incorporated a what if sensitivity to explore long duration energy storage and fuel cells in basin as a potential no combustion alternative to green hydrogen. So essentially it is very similar to a scenario, but we've included it in the what if scenarios and not in the core scenarios. Of course, what we heard also was cost effectiveness is important, and affordability. We heard that from the AG that capital expenditures should be clearly reported, and asked the question of how will subsidizing and funding power system programs affect individual customer bills? And what will the cost to customers be in order to electrify, switching from fossil fueled vehicles and buildings to electricity alternatives? And to address these affordability concerns, we will include a high level rates and bill impact analysis for each of the scenarios. There was a lot of also comments about technology readiness and electric load uncertainty. The desire for LADWP to represent emerging storage technologies in the modeling, but at the same time base our analysis on options that can be feasibly implemented rather than abstract generic solutions. They also want us to explore low load sensitivity per historical flat and declining trends, and study the effects on cost shifting and rates. So we will be incorporating an active technology innovation process and continue working with industry partners such as EPRI to better understand the suitability of emerging technologies for power system implementation. And we will also include a low load sensitivity to analyze impact on rates. There is also a lot of concern about equity and air quality and the burden on disadvantaged communities. In addition to environmental justice, they want us to ensure that disadvantaged communities are not overburdened financially as a result of high bills from potential expenditures at an unprecedented pace. They want us to study the air quality impacts from pollutants such as nitrous oxides on local communities. And to address this, the air quality impact concern, we are partnering with NREL to perform an air quality analysis for each of the scenarios in the SLTRP. And that's very new. We've never done that before. So the purpose of the advisory group meetings will be to provide perspectives on major issues that LADWP will face in the next 25 years and provide input on the strategic scenarios that were developed to be analyzed and to provide input on the final recommended resource plan. The public workshops will include community meetings at the beginning of the review and comment period, and we intend to use other communication methods to provide information and will publicize opportunities to provide further input to the SLTRP team. The public meetings have increased from prior years. This year's public outreach will start much earlier in the process and include a series of 4 meetings, most likely through online video conferencing. However, in-person meetings may not be possible as we have done in past years, but we can consider in-person meetings if the COVID circumstances continue to improve. So another a new feature of the SLTRP is to really consider risk factors. We know that getting to 100% renewable is going to be very difficult. And shown here are some of the major risk factors to implementation that will be evaluated and communicated as part of the SLTRP. One of those being cost and rate impacts. We will be looking at modeling the impacts of severe weather, volatile fuel, and GHG emission allowance costs and varying levels of mixes of renewables, local solar demand response, energy efficiency, in order to ascertain the upper and lower bounds of cost and rate impacts. We also will be considering transmission build risk. And beyond efforts to seek legislative relief for permitting, internal groups have been working closely and reporting major project status updates on the biweekly basis, as I mentioned before. The SLTRP model also includes representation of LADWP's transmission corridors, so allowing us to determine where potential transmission bottlenecks may occur in the future. And a very important part of this is the staffing and workforce part of it. The SLTRP will incorporate an integrated human resources plan, which will estimate the staffing resources required to achieve our aggressive decarbonization goals, taking into account retirements and the hiring of new personnel, as well as making recommendations to improve knowledge transfer to new employees. In addition to ramping up the workforce, training time for specific classifications performing the work must also be considered. For example, electric craft helpers and new engineering associates in training have a regimented training program to bring their staff up to speed. We also have a risk factor of electrification adoption rates. Although electrification increases customer demand with a corresponding increase in revenues, this increased demand will require additional generation, storage, transmission, distribution resources that will require increased capital investment. The goal will be to make these investments well ahead of time to support the increased electrification that we foresee coming in the future. And we will be modeling various levels of building electrification as well as differing rates of electric vehicle adoption. And reliability and resiliency. So this is new to the 2022 SLTRP. We will be calculating lost load hours will be calculated for each scenario using a stochastic approach in accordance with industry standards. And this will allow the IRP group to determine the resources necessary to achieve a quantifiable level of reliability Additionally, impacts of transmission outages will be examined, simulating the effects of wildfires and other natural disasters. We also will be considering supply chain risks as well as implementation and feasibility of these efforts. And just to highlight the last second to the last slide that I have here, one of the major risk factors that we are working to address, one of the main findings of the LA 100 study was that maintaining low rates requires high electrification or simply increased electricity sales. However, this also requires that we expand our distribution capacity to keep up with increased electricity demand from electric vehicle charging and building electrification. And at present, over a third of our electric feeders, distribution feeders or 500 distribution lines are currently experiencing overloads. From annual distribution load forecast prepared by the Distribution Planning Group, we know that we will have a future capacity shortfall at our receiving and distribution stations, and we foresee a need to build or expand at minimum 10 new stations by 2040. This will be an unprecedented level of expansion considering that we have only built 4 stations in the last 20 years. The SLTRP will evaluate and communicate the added distribution capital and O&M investments necessary to support electrification. And once the SLTRP recommended scenario is approved, these additional investments will be included in the power system budget. So the short-term next steps are to complete modeling of scenarios and sensitivities and hold advisory and public outreach meetings to review the findings and provide recommendations for management and board approval. Lastly, the SLTRP will be used as a regulatory document to submit to CEC for IRP filing, and will also be used to justify programs and projects and support our rate actions critical to providing funding support to achieve our 100% by 2035 goal. And I want to thank you and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Terrific. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner BARAD-HOPKINS?
I have a question. When you talk about load sensitivities, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, because there's a range of expected outcomes. You never know exactly what the load will look like, but you could predict based on work that's going on inside the distribution system. For instance, like the Port of LA will be having electrification going on. They have plans, so we incorporate those plans into the forecast. We incorporate what's going on at LAX as far as expansion plans there. Hyperion, for instance, there's expansion plans there as well. So and then just looking at the overall electric vehicle transportation plans that we have, the 580,000 vehicles by 2030 that we know of. We know that buses will be electrified by 2030. We know that we've got the Olympics coming down the road. So we know a lot of these things that get incorporated into the load forecasts. And we know that certain things will not happen. And so we have sort of a low range load forecast and a high range load forecast.
You're keeping on top of all of that, what's happening in LA.
Yes, we have groups that are in charge of that. Yeah. And we interact very closely with those groups within FSO, and then also our distribution planning group, which is also under me.
Okay. Does air conditioning play a part in a lot of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So air conditioning is a huge component, as you can see in the summertime when, in the wintertime, as a comparison, our loads are about 3,000 megawatts. And then in the summertime, it can get up to over 6,000 megawatts. We've gotten up to a high of 6,500. And I think most of that is primarily due to air conditioning. So that is a huge factor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. This was very thoughtful, and I think the way you laid it out was very good, easy to understand.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes?
So I just have a few questions. You talked about green hydrogen. Hydrogen is a famous topic right now because of the technology that's advancing or not. So how do we ensure that our low-income communities do not suffer any more pollution when we think about combustion, even if we're talking about, different types of hydrogen, right? So how do we ensure that they don't have any more of that pollution?
Right.
That's number one. And then the other one is that how do we prioritize our low-income communities to meaningfully participate in energy transmission?
Commissioner Reyes, if I could touch on the hydrogen question, because that is one of the biggest areas of feedback that we've gotten on this power plan. We've gotten feedback from a number of advisory group members who have said, we understand that your forecasted use of hydrogen is very low. If you look at the way that we use natural gas today, it's about 30% of the time today. It's going to ramp down dramatically over the next decade. When we get to the point where we're using hydrogen, we think that the utilization of it will be somewhere between 1% and 5% of the time. So just by sheer volume, the local air quality emissions will improve. But we have gotten feedback that says, well, we understand that, but what if there's high heat days? What if there's wildfires that impact? And you need to use that resource multiple days at a time. We want you to study that. We want you to look at those air quality impacts. And we've agreed as part of this SLTRP to do that. As James mentioned, we've never done the local air quality impact assessment before, and we've never looked at the consecutive utilization before. And so we've responded back to our advisory group members who have asked for that and said, we will look at that and we will try to understand what those air quality impacts are. There's a significant amount of research that's emerging on NOx emissions with respect to hydrogen. So we're very optimistic that that will be very controllable. And just by the sheer utilization and minimizing that, we believe that that will be something that will be well understood, but we have agreed to study it very, very deeply as part of the SLTRP. And I think that this year versus the subsequent years, we're going to learn a lot more, and we'll be able to study it a lot more and understand it a lot more. We also know that there's going to be a significant amount of dollars available to help demonstrate a lot of the technologies, including some of the emissions controls and that sort of thing. So this is something that we take extraordinarily seriously, and we believe that today we've been responsive to those types of questions that say we want the information to be able to understand what those impacts will be. So where we've said in the past, we think those impacts will be low. Now we'll be able to show that very clearly.
So there's also a crossover with our equity 100 equity strategies, right? The LA 100 equity strategies group with this SLTRP when it comes to the green hydrogen and the pollution impacts and all that, and how the communities will be participating in terms of their feedback with these projects.
That's absolutely right. The reason that we're able to do the air quality impact analysis is because of the equity strategies effort and the way that we've built up that group and the work that they're doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the mechanism to be able to do that. So we're bringing on that expertise, and through that effort, our internal staff, our environmental staff will be trained on how to do that in the future. And that will be part of our ongoing future power plans. So it's because of that effort that we have the ability to do that.
So that dovetails also to my second question about the ensuring that there's participation of our low-income communities in terms of the thinking about the energy transmission projects that we have. Is that also in the works?
Commissioner, did you say the energy transmission projects or transition projects?
No, transmission.
Transmission.
Is there participation by our low-income communities in terms of giving the feedback when we're thinking about our transmission projects?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sorry that I don't have the information on that. I would imagine that absolutely, but I just don't know what our strategy is with respect to the transmission projects. James or Reiko, if you know, otherwise we'll get back to you on that one.
I would just say that the transmission projects that we're talking about are reconductoring and upgrading. They're not brand new corridors, so they'd be using the existing right-of-ways.
Okay.
And I'd like to add a component to what Jason said. One of the important components of the NREL study was looking at total emission impacts throughout the basin. And no matter the scenario, The impacts from power generation were minimal in comparison to other sources of pollution within the basin. It was really a tiny component, no matter which scenario we were talking about.
Okay, thank you.
So I have my questions. A few of them are similar to, or observations are similar to those of Commissioner Reyes with respect to some of the information presented on slide 12, where you've indicated that you've got advisory group feedback on capital expenditures and costs, particularly customer costs to electrify, which in the equity strategy study is often referred to as debt burden. Or utility debt burden at the end of the day, the explore low load sensitivities, impact rates, and obviously the environmental justice pieces. I understand NREL is supporting both studies. I know that they're partnered with UCLA on the LA 100 equity strategies, but I'm curious as to, or just very interested in making sure that the information that's being generated relative to these questions, regardless of which study they're supporting, is being shared so that we're not, operating in any kind of silos with respect to who's got access to what. Curious, Jason, about what you said in terms of the LA 100 equity strategy study enabling the look at local air quality impacts and how that's occurring. Is it that particular issue is coming up in both places and the actual the work on that is being performed as a part of the equity strategies work and then will be shared with the STLRP? Mm-hmm. Is that the way that, so we're sort of blending assignments so that we're not doing independent work on the same questions?
Absolutely right. So when the equity strategies effort kicked off, it was a part of the scope to look into local air quality impacts. The LA 100 study did not look at neighborhood level air quality impacts, but recommended that we do. And part of that was for the reason that Dr. Pickle mentioned, which is the vast majority of the local air quality emissions come from the transportation sector electrification, and that at a very, very small portion of it comes from the natural gas emissions. So it helps us understand where those impacts are and where those benefits are. And so to your point of working across divisions and across the power system, that's absolutely right. So this is not being reinvented. It is because of that contract that was set up with equity strategies through NREL that we're able to support what the advisory group is asking us to do with respect to looking at local air quality impacts.
I'm interested in, there was this note on slide 14 that mentioned major, that talked about legislative relief. So, and I think that the way it was phrased was in addition to legislative relief, this is for the construction of those transmission lines that we were also pursuing, other work. Are we seeking legislative relief with respect to, I'm just not aware of it. So is there some effort underway to secure some sort of legislative solution to challenges with respect to transmission bills or permitting?
Yeah, so with respect to transmission, we recognized really early on that the amount of local transmission that we had to do under the existing timelines that it takes to actually build and permit and so on, we just simply wouldn't be able to do all of that in the time that we needed to do it. And so we started to engage a lot of folks a number of years ago at the state legislature and inform them of that. And it really came down to two potential areas. And I say potential because to answer your question, I don't have the current status on what our active efforts are. I think it might be more sort of monitoring and sort of engaging informally, but we'll have to get back to you on what our specific engagement is. But it really comes down to agency coordination, looking at different state agencies to make sure that we have predictable timelines. Part of the key is not just how long it takes, but the predictability, because to be able to do all of these projects, you need to sequence them. Mm-hmm. When we're upgrading certain stations, when we're taking transmission lines out, we need to have a really tightly scheduled schedule to be able to do that. and uncertainty really hurts that. And the other piece of this that we think may provide some potential, some serious benefit is to have some confined timelines around the CEQA process, not to bypass CEQA, but to do something similar to what some stadium bills have done. So to get specifically to your question, I don't know what the current status is of our engagement, except that we have largely been educating a lot of legislators with respect to the fact that unless certain things change, unless our ability to do this quicker changes, we won't have the ability to actually build all of that transmission in the time that we need to do it in order to achieve these goals.
So, and I asked that question because there was also a comment that, you know, in consultation with major projects, or this is all being sort of monitored by or pulled together in major projects, that we see no obstacles to this particular element of LA 100, of the LA 100 implementation. And I was I was interested in that because that doesn't seem to align with at least what I understand, which is that getting these 10 projects built in the time frame that we have allotted without some intervention somewhere is that we don't have a high degree of confidence that we can do that.
So are you suggesting or saying that you had heard that we do have the ability to actually do those under existing circumstances?
That was the exact words. I wrote them down. Major projects, no obstacles. So I was curious. Did you mean no obstacles from a planning perspective?
Oh no, I think I meant identifying obstacles so that we could know that something's going wrong and we could plan around it. Yeah.
Well, except that the obstacle right now is that under current circumstances, like, because it's not that there's any, I mean, we could build them, but we can't build them on time, right? Without some intervention.
So that is correct. Given the existing historical actual data that we've seen, the actual projects that we built, we don't believe that we'll be able to do this in the time frame that we need to unless there is change.
And no, and the reason that I think it's important for us to be really clear is there are a lot of stakeholders in this process, and we're all collaborating, fingers crossed, toward a common goal. And there are things that we control and there are things that we don't control. And it would be useful for any number of those stakeholders to be really clear about those things that we don't control, where they may be useful or where it might be useful for them to direct some of their advocacy for solutions. And so it's important that we not convey a sense of, inadvertently, a sense of confidence in our ability to achieve something without a significant caveat, that being, but not within the time frame that we say is required in order to, and to the extent that all of this has to come together, and I can continue to try to understand, like, what can we miss and still deliver? Does this all really have to come together? Or are there pieces that don't necessarily have to come together? But every time you present this, you present these transmission upgrades as something that needs to happen in order for us to be able to reliably import the renewables. And if that's the case, then in addition to continuing to hold the department's feet to the fire, and I think that, we're pretty well singed, we're good. We've walked across the hot coals, we're on the other side with them. So in addition to that it becomes very important for folks to appreciate that there are other agencies and other players in this arena that need to be properly educated about their role in making this possible. So I just wanted to clarify that because what I heard didn't align with what I thought I understood about it. So I assume I'm correct about that. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested in the status of the IHRP, that's what the Integrated Human Resource Plan. I should never use acronyms. I know that's being worked on. Can you tell me when that'll be ready?
Yeah,
I don't have the schedule for that. My understanding was that it was going to be about this springtime, but I don't know what the delivery date is, but we can certainly circle back and get you a firm date.
Okay, and then there was another piece about, and I just again want to be super transparent about distribution investments. Because there was a comment made. I mean, that last slide is a scary slide as it relates to distribution. And I know that we've had a far more extensive presentation about where we are and where we need to get. When we look at I guess it's the next to the last slide, risk factors relative to distribution. And it's just that, you made the comment that we were evaluating the needs and the costs related to the scaling that we have to do in this arena in order to deliver again. And this is an essential part of delivering with respect to the loads that are necessary for electrification, right? I mean, this is another one of those must do or else. And you indicated that once we had identified those costs, that they would be included in the power budget. And I wrote the word maybe with a big circle and lots of exclamation points, because we are continuing to evaluate all of this as it relates to cost, debt burden, equity, impact on rates.
Right.
And we've got to get all of that work completed before we can, and to make sure that we can budget in order to literally, in order to pay for it all. So I get nervous every time we talk about this, and I know that I'm in some way reflecting back what has to be anxiety within the department every time we talk about this, because the only thing that changes is the date on the calendar. And the lessening of the time period between now and 2035, I think it is just critically important that we speak with extreme urgency about the need to understand cost, understand rate structure, and understand what it will take and how we'll finance this. And not speak as if it's a fait accompli, because we're a long way from that, very long way from fait accompli. Not because it's not possible. And LA 100, as as is oft stated here, showed that it was possible. The hard work in terms of how to actually implement that is what didn't get done. And we've just got to be very emphatic as we do this work as to what we control and what we don't, and where we need help and who needs to come to the table to help us. And that includes other city leaders, that includes state leaders. Again, the department's there, and it includes external stakeholders. And their insistence that others show up to meet the commitments that we've made with respect to performing and implementing this work. And then finally, I just want to acknowledge corporate strategy and communications. It seems in presentation after presentation after presentation, there's a role that our corporate strategies and communications group is playing in organizing and facilitating and communicating. And it's a big job that's being done by a relatively small division. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say that it is going to become even more important as we move forward. So we want to keep strategically thinking about the role of communication, of outreach at a multitude of levels, because we have to have broad conversations with the public. We have to have targeted conversations with certain stakeholders and policymakers. and, very sophisticated conversations with people that want to engage us on issues, especially, the green hydrogen situation, I think is one that's very apropos. Jason, you started this presentation by, talking about the research that we did and the leadership that this department displayed, and and how it was in part kicked off by the sensitivity and the resistance to repowering scattergood. And as I heard all of that, what jumped into my mind was, again, another sort of effort to be incredibly transparent. What every study has shown is that we must have reliable, on-demand, in-basin generation to run our system, period, full stop. And, the clear path to that is not yet apparent. We are planning into the future, but in planning into the future, we cannot ever sacrifice on-demand, real-time, reliable in-basin generation and ensure operational reliability and resiliency. That's just bottom line. And these are tough conversations. They're nuanced conversations. I want to assert that, at least on behalf of this department, that they're conversations that we're engaging in transparency and in good faith, as we both plan into the future, do everything we can to help make the market for the future. But honestly, none of us know where this is all going to land. And we have to be able to recognize good faith on our part and insist upon and compel and, and work with external stakeholders who are also acting in good faith. And everybody's got to get comfortable with some level of ambiguity, because it just is when you're working toward the future. So communication, again, and good stakeholder engagement and conversations that are taking place at every level will be critical to our success long term. I said a lot, I'm sorry. So we can move on to the next presentation.
May I add a couple things? The LA 100 study, NREL characterized the 100% renewables by 2035 as a stretch case. And our scenarios, case one is that stretch case. And then we stretch some more and we try stretching even more. Our scenarios are not representing a full range of reality. We try to compensate with for the reality check by doing scenarios on things like how fast is load going to grow, other things like that. But as the last 3 years have taught us, more than one thing goes wrong at once. And it would be really helpful to have a case that considered starts off with a zero growth case. And we don't know what might cause that zero growth. We could have a lot of electric vehicles, but we could have a lot of solar installations behind the meter at the same time and have no net load growth. So, and the difference between a sensitivity is you're looking at one thing changing at a time. The benefit of scenarios is you're changing a bunch of things at once to paint a whole picture. We're not painting a full, more pessimistic picture as part of the scenarios. So we really need perhaps a case that looks like something in the range of or similar to SB 100, but with less load growth. And the things that come with it, along with the supply chain problems, that seem to be getting worse rather than getting better. I think we need to have that component of an additional, call it a realist scenario or a pessimist scenario, but something that incorporates more of that list of risk factors that you went through at the end, but all in one scenario.
Yeah, I think we'll have to circle back with you to get a little bit more detail on what we could do given the time that we have. I will say that your risk is, I think you're being polite with how big of a risk that is. I think if we look at the load growth from a couple of years ago that we estimated to today, it's about 20% below. So a lot of that is COVID, but a lot of that is energy efficiency. A lot of that is a slower uptake in electric vehicles. So
for all the California utilities have had a decline in load over the past decade, and to forecast growth is to forecast a hockey stick. And any modeler, planner looks at a hockey stick and goes, "Uh-oh, is that going to happen?" And we really have to be very realistic about these changes.
We will address that concern the exact way we do it. I think we ought to probably meet to make sure that the way that we're trying to address it sufficiently gets to what you're talking about. But I can tell you that we take that risk very seriously and agree with you that that is a major risk factor. And if we don't see, to just underscore this, if we don't see that load growth that we are projecting, it means higher rates. So that's what's at stake. That's why it's so important to look at that load growth. So we will follow up with you to figure out how best to do that given the runway that we have left.
Yeah, well, I understand. COVID's caused sleep problems. I bet SLTRP does too.
Thank you very much. This has been very helpful, and I look forward to the next update. And thank you, Dr. Pickle. Appreciate it.
Thank
you. Presentation 4, legal fees and other costs related to the billing system meltdown several years back.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ann Santilli, Chief Financial Officer. If we could go to the next slide. So in response to the Board Resolution 22097, myself and the Chief Accounting Employee have reviewed the department's financial records to determine ratepayer funds spent between September 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2021, in connection with any matter including investigations stemming from our related to the customer billing system implementation, litigation against PricewaterhouseCoopers, the customer class action litigation, and all subsequent legal costs incurred for representation in the class action proceedings following discovery of the Jones conflicts, including expenditures for substitute class counsel, special master investigations, and the U.S. Attorney's investigation for the above matters, and the Aventador contract and subsequent related contracts related to Ardent. So in the interest of full transparency, we've included in our report the hours that could be tracked back to payments, the names of the firms, and either they represented the department or the city of Los Angeles. Next slide. So through our work, we've come up with a little over $122.5 million in expenditures. The first one on the slide is the Ardent Cyber Solutions. The expenditure was a little over $4.3 million, and all of those costs were billed by Ardent. There was no sub-consultant cost for that, and a little over 14,000 hours billed to the department. The next one was the Aventador contract, $21,895,000, all paid to that firm with over 50,000 hours and no sub-consultant provided. The next one that we identified was Barkovich and Yap for $459,000, no sub-consultants for them, and 1,570 hours.
And are they lawyers?
They are actually special masters for bill review, and their costs continue, I believe. The next one is Paul Bender Consulting for $658,000 for 2,268 hours. All of that was their firm. They have additional employees under them, but no sub-consultant invoices.
And what work did they provide?
They are the court monitor. And I will ask Joe Bradich to assist in any explanations I cannot provide, but that's the court monitor that's been reviewing the department's work.
And are they still engaged by the department?
I believe they are.
Are they still working on this project?
I don't believe Bender is. I believe Bender's term expired. And again, just to be clear, Bender was not engaged by the department.
It was a cost of monitoring the settlement. Is that correct?
Correct.
And these payments were made by the department.
Thank you.
The next one is Concentric Energy Advisors for $393,000 for a little over 1,000 hours. These are attorneys who are also looking over the settlement. The next one is
And who are they engaged by?
Concentric was engaged by the new class counsel to evaluate and overlook the settlement to make sure the payouts were done correctly, and also review the payments that were made. They were the folks who helped sign off on the execution of the payouts.
Okay.
The next vendor the department had was Lance Kroner for $21.9 million. And from there, $19.2 million was paid to Lance Kroner. But then there were two consultants he had included in his billings, Paul Bender Consulting for $2,453,000, and then Barkovich and Yap for another $279,000. I do have copies of these invoices, and I can include the hours in my final report.
So was then Bender's firm paid both as a monitor independent of his relationship with Lance Kroner, and then in addition to that?
After Lance Kroner was no longer special counsel, the Bender payments were made directly to Bender. At one time, they were made through Lance Kroner, and the same is true for Special Master Barkovich and Yap.
I see. Okay.
The next attorney firm was Hodgman, Salkin, Tusher, and Perez for $4.3 million. And they had another firm below them, Alvarez and Marsal Disputes firm. So out of that, Hodgman was $3.3 million, but then Alvarez was paid in at $1 million, and their hours are listed as well as 4,600 hours for Hodgman and 2,397 for Alvarez.
And the services they were providing?
Hodgman was the special master appointed by the court, and Alvarez was a forensic subconsultant.
So this team was responsible for the special master's report that was issued?
That is correct.
Okay.
The next firm is Ellis George, that we have paid $11,709,000. And of that amount, $10,242,000 was retained by them for 19,180 hours of work. But we noticed several other firms that provided invoices to them that were reimbursed. Stroh's Freeberg Professional Services, I understand that's a data consultant. David Cameron Carr, an ethics attorney. Alan Barnes and Jones, another attorney. Litnomics, financial and economic experts for $85,000. And then there were court mediators for $41,000. That was paid through this contract, but we understand that there's probably a few more dollars in that area paid through the legal trust fund that we're going to review as well.
Thank you.
On the next slide, KCC Class Action Services. This was a firm that the department hired to administer the class action payments. So we paid 17.8 million in expenditures. 9.3 million of it was funds to used by KCC for this process for 33,118 hours, and then refunds of 8,530,000. The department has refunded just under $108 million for everything in this litigation. And the new rule is how far we can back bill. Of that $108 million, this 8.5 million is part of that, where we couldn't do a bill credit. We had to do a check to a customer. And there is a few more dollars in that
I'm sorry,
area.
I just want to understand that part. So essentially, the department, when you say refund to a customer, there's a difference between, so when you say a credit, are those monies that were paid to the department that they were then prospectively or retroactively crediting? So we're not giving them money, we're simply saying you overpaid us, so this is your credit?
They overpaid us and they're no longer our customer.
No, that's for these folks. But you said that we,
the 108 million
yes,
was money that we had billed these customers, and we found that we either overbilled them or we didn't bill them timely, and so we had to provide a refund, a bill credit to reduce the billing. They may have not paid it, or if they did pay it, they'd have a bill credit on their bill that would be applied to their next bill.
okay, because there's a difference between a credit, because we're just correcting the bill, and a refund. Because when I think of at least in my mind, when I think of a refund, it means I gave someone money and they're giving it back to me. When I think of sort of a credit, or a bill correction, you overbilled me and you had to fix
8 million of bill corrections because we either billed them wrong because of the billing system, because of estimation or something else, or we have to bill now within 6 months of when the customer starts service. And if we don't do our part and get that bill out in 6 months, we have to forego any billings. So if we didn't do our part, we have to refund or credit the customer back that amount.
Yeah, so essentially we spent 9 million to give back 8.5 million.
Those are checks.
No, I understand.
Yes.
No, because again, that's an actual refund. So basically we identified, up to 85 or $8.5 million that weren't owed to us that we collected. And we had to spend 9 million to give it back.
And KCC, they were the administrators of the class action lawsuit, so they sent out letters letting customers know were they entitled to no credit, there's nothing wrong with their bills, or, they had a lot of upfront work to close out the issues. So they sent out letters to all of our customers saying, based on a review of your bills, you'll be receiving a credit of, it could be $0 or a different dollar amount. So they handled
So they were administering not just the actual return of money, but they were also doing the work associated with identifying or communicating with those folks who had credits that they would be receiving and sort of sorting through all of that.
Credits with all of our customers. They would be communicating with our customers, yes.
Okay.
The next one is KPMG. So as part of the class action settlement, we had to have 2 audits done. And KPMG was hired to do a review of the billing system to say if the billing system worked or not and what issues they found. Their reports were then shared with the court to communicate what was working and what we needed to adjust. And then the next one is LEHRER. It was another legal firm for $4.1 million. And of that, $3,770,000 was retained by them for 10,272 hours worth of work. They also had Stroh's Fritzberg Professional Services. This firm actually was one of the original firms that ended up closing. And so the same subconsultant was continued on.
Weren't they acquired by Brown George?
They were not acquired by Brown George. Some of the partners from Brown George went to, some of the partners from LEHRER went to Brown George. Some went to another firm.
But the partner with who had the DWP
Correct.
business went to Brown George.
Correct. So the best way to say would be that the Brown George contract came about after the liner dissolution to follow the partners that were handling the work.
Okay.
And then Paradise Law Group had $6 million worth of billings and no subconsultant billings for 13,463 hours. And then
And that work wasn't for legal work, correct?
That is correct. That was with respect to the remediation work that was done under a contract and then an amendment to that contract.
Okay.
And then the last one is Oracle. From communications with city attorney, Oracle was doing various work for us to determine the amount of refunds to do system work. So $26.6 million. I do have copies of those invoices and we can accumulate those
That's
hours.
a lot of money. That's not just chopped liver. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And yeah, it's a lot of money.
Not just chump change.
And you indicated that you are continuing to review.
We mark this as preliminary. We just want to do a review of the legal trust fund to capture any other mediation costs or any smaller costs that were related to this that are not part of this. And we'll also, for the invoices that we didn't capture the hours, we'll put that in there as well. And wrap this up this month.
Thank you. And if you could just submit the final as a filed report, that would be terrific. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Berard, any additional comments? It's a lot of money.
That's not just chump change.
That's
Commissioner Reyes.
zip.
No, she's playing Switzerland. Okay.
Yeah, I think, obviously it's a lot to absorb. I mean, it's a very big number. Among the things that strikes me is the critical importance of keeping a dashboard with respect to legal fees. It's, among the challenges when you're managing a public agency is that you're often, there's the cost associated with problem solving, particularly when it becomes legal problems, become obscured. And it's difficult to look at what this cost and not to imagine that there could have been a more expedient and less costly approach to resolution. There are a lot of people who made a lot of money, and we won't even begin to deal with the rogue nature of some of the firms and individuals or some of the firms associated with this tally of cost. But to have a regular public accounting of how we're spending, this agency and ultimately our ratepayers' money with respect to legal fees, I think is critical because it's important that we manage not just projects and not just, all of the other things that we do, but that we are managing against our, we're managing these kinds of costs. That's what good businesses do, and they are far more aggressive. Also, we often think about the matters associated with the billing system, failed implementation of that billing system. We know it was costly. We think about it in terms of the numbers we see in the newspaper. We don't see numbers this big. But in addition to that, these costs represent again, just a fraction of the overall impact on the department's operating efficiency and operating capacity. And so I remain mindful of that. And our multiple failures with respect to both the implementation and the huge mistake of not listening to the internal voices that said slow down on that. And then the tragic mistakes made both from an oversight and also significantly from the perspective of the city attorney's management of this litigation, and the resulting impact on the reputation of the department, trust, both internal and external, and really the significant impacts on morale and trust internal remain incalculable from my perspective. My hope is that by confronting these issues squarely and taking appropriate steps to mitigate and or beyond mitigation to ensure that these failures are not repeated, that allows everyone to get up, face forward, and move on in a way that represents the best of the department and that reflects the actual capacity and the professionalism and the expertise of the people who work here. So I thank you for this report, and will ensure that we, as a part of that motion, that we have a regular report. This becomes not these particular numbers, but our utilization of council becomes a regular part of our dashboard, and that we take better steps toward managing these kinds of costs. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have
the most appropriate follow-up ever.
Yes, the gift that keeps on giving.
You have now.
But that which, doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and in this case makes us better. So we are still standing, and we will move to our final report in this segment from the General Manager regarding our Inspector General.
Thank you very much. This could not be any more fitting follow-up to Ann's report on legal fees. And I do agree. I think one of the tragedies is not having timely information and good feedback for the board, because it's certainly unfair for the board to expect to make decisions without broader context. And that's one of the things I'm hoping we'll be able to continue to bring is regular updates on overall costs, whether it's legal costs or on particular projects and other things. So you can see how this kind of very large but often hidden dollars absolutely affect our bottom line here. With the Inspector General, this position was newly created. As you're aware, the mayor thought it was important to create this position here following the whole episode we just talked about with the fallout from the class action lawsuit, including with our outside counsel, Paul Parody, and the firm that he hired. Understanding at the time the mayor was concerned about this is before we had any idea of how bad this was or how deep it ran. And so certainly in retrospect, with all we've learned in the last couple of months, this has become even more obvious of a need for us to have. The position, because it's not covered in the city charter, becomes basically an exempt employee under the general manager's appointing authority. Because it's unusual in a regular IG structure where there'd be a charter created position like under police or fire, or that they have in LA Metro. We have a dash line responsibility reporting to the board. The intent of that, and I've made it very clear with the IG, is to have full and unfettered communication, collaboration with the board, as well as being part of the senior management team at the department. And I think that I heard a comment yesterday on the radio in regards to the news announcement about the IG, and concerned about is going to be independence. I'm doing my best to set this up so that this person has enough avenues and enough places to go to be able to act as fully independently as possible, given the structure that we have. And the IG office will have anywhere from 1.5 to 2 dozen people supporting them in a variety of civil service classes, as well as the ability to add contract folks really helping investigation to the support as may be needed. The duties of the IG were done. They're conducted, let me back up, I apologize. The mayor's office encouraged us to work with an outside vendor, a man named Dan Schnur, who has been involved in various civic areas, as well as, I believe, education at USC, if I recall correctly, that looking at what the needs of an IG would be and what the duties should be. He conducted a number of interviews, both internally and externally, to put together a document. The idea for the basic duties, so the internal inspector general would conduct and supervise audits, reviews, and analyze our programs, our operations, and our contracts, receive and investigate complaints from all sources, and conduct investigations, certainly concerning alleged abuse, fraud, and waste, either internally or could be externally as well, as we need to investigate. Provide independent analysis and evaluation appraisals of our performance effectiveness. To me, this is a valuable piece of being part of the senior management team, is helping us to do our job better, providing an independent set of eyes into everything that we do to help us to improve as an agency all the way around. And then to report on all those investigations, audits, and other activities, coordinate both to report publicly and report to the board on a regular basis. They're providing leadership and coordination in policy changes or remedial actions that we need to do to correct deficiencies. I assume that along the lines of what we've just heard about legal fees, that the IG would have some recommendations in short order for the board. In looking at systemic issues and steps to be taken to prevent problems in the future. Recognize we can't stop everything, but we can put as stronger programs in place as we can to try to prevent problems in the future, and then also situations to react quickly when we are aware of those and to do a better job of following through on those. The IG will have the ethics department, ethics office, which is a very small office which needs to grow, report to them. That has to do with ethics compliance in the city, and it also charges coordinating with other offices in the city, agencies, even district attorney and whoever, LAPD, when there's a suspected criminal behavior or other violation. The office is structured to have an audit team, an ethics, have the ethics office, our corporate performance office, corporate protection and risk analysis, and office of special investigation. The next slide is the org chart. I've probably gone way faster than the slides. Sorry, Rachie. If I go to the org chart, one more slide. Thank you. So this is a basic structure. The structure of the Inspector General would have direct reports overseeing audit. There is an internal audit group under Ann that will need to continue to do financial audits, and they do contract audits during contracting to make sure that change orders are done correctly, that we're getting what we paid for. Some of the contracts involve other parties, maybe through a JPA. The audits for this group, I'm looking for particularly compliance audits with department policies, complying with our rules and regulations and the policies we have set forth. Also audits of how we use the purchasing process, that we're doing things correctly in our bidding processes and our evaluation process, and performance audits of department functions and where we can find areas for improvement. Our ethics office, there's two areas there. One is ethics compliance. We all just did our Form 700s. So there's the ethics compliance and education part, which is keeping the department, both educated and aware, as well as compliant with all the regulations. And then there's a whole area of complaints and investigations. And this is an area that has been somewhat disaggregated, and we're working on, as a matter of fact, we're working currently on the current flow chart to understand where complaints go and where complaints don't complete the process. And so the IG would be responsible for making sure that all complaints are investigated and followed up on, and there's a report back. They also have corporate performance, which is part of FSO now. I believe corporate performance, besides doing the IEA survey and other other industry surveys. Should be a valuable tool, is being used as a yardstick for how we perform on a regular basis. And so my goal is to put corporate performance under the IG as a regular use as a measuring stick for how the department does overall. Corporate protection risk analysis is a new concept. This is something that I'll need to develop with the IG. This concept is really stepping back and looking at where the department has exposure, where we need to assess the risks, and to look objectively at the actions that we take and the policies that we have, and to try to make improvements so that we don't have places that we could be vulnerable either internally or externally. And then the last part would be security services, OSI. OSI works for Chris Facino. They're important part at times of his management structure, but largely a lot of the work that they do in investigations will be it'll be directed and reviewed with the Inspector General. That'll be one of the investigative arms that he'll have available to him. OSI has done a number of investigations. They've daylighted criminal investigations in the past and work on behalf of groups throughout the department where there's perceived or expected wrongdoing. So we did have an announcement come out, and I sent the board an announcement. We have an Inspector General. His name is Sergio Perez. He will start May 9th. He's extremely excited to be here. He's got a nice broad background. He is a lawyer by trade. He's grew up locally in Los Angeles. He lives within view of the building. He's currently heads up the Office of Independent Review in Orange County, which was part of Orange County getting out of the issues that they had down there. He worked for the Ethics Department, Ethics Commission in the city of LA. Prior to that, he worked for the County Inspector General. He worked for the Attorney General of California and the Department of Justice. He has a broad variety of experience, a tremendous attitude about helping us to become the best department we can be. And he's a very good communicator and a great collaborator. I've never been so excited to have someone who could help look over my shoulder and to make sure that, that everything that I do and my staff does is executed with the utmost integrity. When he gets here, we will have a number of people who will transfer in. He'll have some positions to fill. And then I'm sure he'll, when discussing both Joe and Selmo and Nancy and I did the interviews, unanimously believed he was the right person for this job. And when he gets here, he believes in cross-functional teams. He's led investigations personally. He led teams doing investigations. And so I'm sure he'll have some slight rearranging of this, but we'll have him off to what I think is a very good start. And he's anxious to meet all the board members and to see how he could be of service. So that's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I am extremely pleased with who we have coming on board, and I hope the board is too.
Any questions or comments on this item?
There's a question. Based on Mr. Perez's experience and qualifications, did he see the scope of work that we have? Maybe he has other ideas or
yes,
feedback regarding the org chart and the scope of work?
Yes, we actually
applicable.
Put that out in when the recruiter did recruiting. They had that description and the org chart, and so it gives them a definition of the job. Interestingly, candidates for the job were interested in reporting the relationship and their level of independence and act independently. And so he had, all the candidates had questions for us about how this job would be executed. But he was aware of that. And then, this organization is new to us, but not new to someone like him. And so, he clearly has ideas of how to staff it and evolve it correctly. And within both civil service classes he has available to him, and then also where he may need to contract out for other work, especially investigating matters, auditing, really looking into it. And it's interesting because, there's certainly an oversight compliance, watchdog piece of this. Another important piece to me is being able to be a resource that helps every other senior management member do the best job they can by providing, someone who can say, is this right? Are we doing this correctly? Why are we not bidding this? The day in and day out thing, we have processes and policies in place, and looking at how we're living up to those, or where we need to put new policies in place to strengthen the structure of the organization.
Did he have any background with Paul Parody or
No, none at all.
any of the characters that we dealt with?
No, none at all. If he did, it would have been from a prosecutorial side, because he worked for DOJ as a trial attorney in 2 different accounts, including consumer affairs and in another area. So
okay,
he would have been only on the other side of the fence from them. So.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't want to find out that they're his cousins.
No. Not at all.
Very good. So I have a couple of observations.
Yes.
So first, pleased to see the retention of an inspector general. Curious about the org chart. So we'll be looking forward to collaborating and understanding more his perspective. Also interested in who drew this particular org chart. Because, I come from another city commission that had an inspector general, and a commission where the general manager, as in this case, reports directly to the board.
Oh, that's a good point.
In looking at this org chart, you would imagine that the Board of Water and Power Commissioners is on the same line as the general manager, and that's just not the case.
That was an oversight on my part. It should have been above with the line down and the dash line around.
Kind of, sort of. But it really does get back to overall culture and oversight, and a institutional lack of not embrace, but really not a strong sense of presence, I think, by the board, leading to a rather lax appreciation for the actual organization of the Department of Water and Power. So that's one. Then secondly, as part of the oversight structure and the other entity that the Inspector General will need to establish a strong working relationship with, it would be our Office of Ratepayer Advocate, Office of Public Accountability, which is another essential element to the oversight structure of the organization. In my previous role, the Inspector General would have been the third piece of that and would have reported directly to, and did report directly to the board. In this case, that is not the case, but I think we would be getting off to to not observe these little pieces would just put us off on the wrong foot. So it's critical that there be full appreciation for both the ultimate organizational structure and that it be presented that way all the time. I've noticed that on almost everything I see, the organizational structure here starts with the general manager and flows down. And that is simply not the way this organization is set up. So we don't want to reflect it that way moving forward. And then I just also have to say that there is a healthy tension between the role of Inspector General and the roles of others within an agency. And that's going to be an interesting line to walk. It's hard to be, sort of an in-house advisor and also to have the distance and the skepticism necessary for independent oversight. And so we don't want to see, one person as the end all and be all. And I think that those distinctions will get, again, clearer as the entire picture comes, as the entire picture emerges. Super excited to welcome him aboard. And I am pretty confident that this is yet another brick in the wall that this department is building to keep at bay corrosive forces that might seek to undermine our efforts, be they inside or external. So I'm happy about that, and look forward to to this next step. So thank you for getting this wrapped up, and I know the mayor is also extremely pleased that this piece of additional accountability is in place. So, is there anything else? Then I think we've got, we can move on to J. Are there any questions or comments about any items that are on file? Seeing none, we have item K1. Are all the commissioners present eligible to vote on the approval of minutes? I assume we were all at the March 8th meeting. So is there a recommendation with respect to, or a motion with respect to approval of minutes?
So moved.
Second, would you please call the roll?
President McCLAIN-HILL.
Aye.
Vice President Reyes.
Aye.
Commissioner BARAD-HOPKINS.
Aye.
3 ayes.
Motion
Motion
passes.
passes.
Thank you so very much. I think that concludes our open session agenda, and that we can move into closed session at this time. Mr. Brejovich.
Great. At this time, we will then recess in a closed session to deal with agenda items M1 through M5. And in accordance with California Government Code Section 54957.1, we will report any final actions taken therein. We are in recess.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Did we have our, is it regarding this agenda item?
Yes.
Or me, it's not agenda item. We're about to go into closed session. So should we wait until we are in closed session and have Reggie close down our mics?
It's item 12 on the agenda, a closed session.
There's no item 12 on the closed session agenda.
Oh.
Okay. There's an item 12 on the open session agenda, which was passed. And that resolution, Commissioner, just applied to our telecommuting
Yes.
findings.
So we can still do that.
Yes, we can. We did not set this meeting as a meeting where we're telecommuting. So commissioners are appearing in person, as is our staff. This allows for us to continue to have the public telecommute because, to have the public phone into our meetings because we're not allowing for public participation.
Okay.
So we are still hybrid in that regard.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So with that, we will go into closed session and recess. Reggie, would you please prepare for that? And in the meantime, everyone who is not a part of closed session can vacate the room. I think we will stay here for closed session. And Mike, you're live until Reggie tells us they're not.
Stand by, please.